Welcome to Law Scribe Media Radio. I'm here today with Brent Schlueter. Again, he's a revisionist historian and a geopolitical analyst. There's a lot to discuss on this very important date in history, November 22nd. It's been 53 years, I believe, since our last possibly independent president was assassinated by a myriad of characters, Israel probably leading the charge, the Zog getting involved, the mafia, and of course Lyndon Johnson. Welcome to the show, Brent. How you doing today?
Oh yeah, it's good. It should be called Anti-Semitism Day or something like that, because one of the things that people forget that there were two actually other things that happened. Yeah, all right, yeah, anti-Semitism.
Yep.
On this day, JFK, Aldous Huxley, and C.S. Lewis died in 1963. One of the things that those three people had in common was they all resisted the Fabian Society. The Fabian Society runs the London School of Economics, and JFK resisted them. C.S. Lewis rejected the Fabian Society. He was invited many times and was somewhat outspoken against them, not publicly, but there are quotes him against them. And then Aldous Huxley was a member of the Fabian Society and actually got George Orwell into the Fabian Society because Aldous Huxley was the French professor of George Orwell when he was Eric Blair at the Eton College. So, and it was through the insight of the Fabian Society that George Orwell wrote 1984. And the reason he called the book 1984 was that was 100 years after the Fabian Society was created. It was created in 1884. Some say it was created in 1883, but it actually wasn't operational until 1884. And what he was trying to do was show 100 years of Fabian rule and how this incremental socialism, which is what the British society known as the Fabian Society, was going to bring to the world. And let's not forget that it is a Jewish society. Some people say that you use these Fabian theories to throw us off the scent of the Jew. No. The Fabian Society is a Jewish society. It's to bring the world to world socialism, and socialism in a federal sense and not a nationalistic sense. And one of the things that we get a little confused with is we equate federalism with nationalism. Nationalism is the will of the people, where the people's will is represented, and there's a united ideal. Federalism is what is imposed by a government on the people. And that comes through the lobbying of the government. But what makes federalism very dangerous is they say, oh, well, you elected these people in. It's like so maybe you just need to wait for the next election cycle and put new, better people in. And then we go through this wave of meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And what we need are nationalistic leaders. All of the great leaders we've had in our country's history have been nationalistic. Even basically the founder of our country, I think, was Thomas Jefferson. And he was very nationalistic and united ideal. Just read the Declaration of Independence. My whole solution to this Colin Kaepernick thing with the national anthem is, who cares about the Star Spangled Banner? I don't really care, because what is it really? Those words mean nothing to me. But my solution.
Well, from an athlete's perspective, there's references to slavery in it, and that's why they feel a legitimate right to oppose it, let's say, or not endorse it.
But is that the country's ideal? No, the country's actual ideal is in the preamble of the Declaration of Independence. And if we, instead of saying the Pledge of Allegiance, would say the preamble of the Declaration of Independence, or the first two paragraphs, and do that instead of the national anthem, and that would bring in our country's ideal. Now, some glorification of a flag. A flag is a cloth. The united ideal is what is important. And we need to learn how to focus on that. And we don't focus on that. When you get to the point where you're talking about a flag and talking about that becomes like a patriotism, which distracts from the nationalism.
Even jingoism, maybe.
Jingoism, yes, which Orwell always talked about. And so what we have to do is we have to see the difference. What is federalism and what is nationalism? And this is the biggest complaint I have with the libertarians, is that they equate federalism and nationalism. And they see that the government is the problem. And make no mistake, this false pragmatism came about through the University of Chicago. That's where basically the foundation of libertarianism was created, was in the University of Chicago. The University of Chicago is rooted in false cause fallacies and the glorification of all pragmatisms. And that's essentially what New Age is. It's a glorification of pragmatism. So where everything becomes, we have to see both sides of everything, and that's how you create paradigms, is everything has another side. Even oppression, it's like this. It's like, I just stole your wallet, but you need to look at it from my side. It's not everything.
Slavery happened to me, or I'm very poor and I have every right to take from people like yourself, who's white, who historically oppressed my people.
Yes, and that is essentially the roots from which Saul Alinsky, who also is a University of Chicago product.
That's right.
He comes from there with this not only a pragmatism but the false cause fallacy. Oh, yeah, it was the white man. No, it's not the cause of it. But, okay. I mean, come on. We had oppressed Irish people in this country. Mm-hmm. It's like there have been oppressed white people.
Well, and the other thing is, if you look at it from a global perspective and you look at the last several hundred years, if you looked at it purely through the lens of the concept of white supremacy, it does not make sense. World War II doesn't make sense if white supremacy is the leading power. Mm-hmm. You see, because in World War II, you can argue that was European fratricide, mm-hmm. where Europeans murdered each other.
And who was Hitler's biggest ally? Japan. Are they white people?
Right. To the tune of tens of millions of dead. Mm-hmm. It's one thing to say, two brothers were vying for power and one brother killed the other brother so he could ascend to the throne. It's a whole different other thing to suggest that it was somehow beneficial to white people to destroy one another in World War II, right?
It makes sense when you understand that Jewish scholars see both Europe and North America as Nova Rome, New Rome.
That's right.
And they need to get revenge for what the Romans did to the Jews. They never get over this 2,000-year grudge.
Right.
And that's partially because in Jewish belief, entire generations and bloodlines have a collective punishment. So we're still getting our collective punishment. It's like 9/11 happened on, though the significance of 9/11 is that means Tisha B'Av. It was actually it means 11th month and 9th day. But the way we write our days in the United States is different from most of the world, where we write 9/11. So the significance of that happening was that the Twin Towers got down. That's significant of both the temples.
Joachim Boaz.
Right. So there is a significance when you see that this is New Rome. Well, it's not New Rome. Russia's New Rome because that's like Byzantium. But this is like this is the modern day version of Rome. It's like they think Rome never ended. It just expanded. It got broken up. It balkanized. Mm-hmm. And they essentially helped balkanize it. So when we see that, they see us as Rome, it makes sense that there would be a fratricide because they're going to try to tear us apart. Because they see us as Romans. Let's get the Romans to fight each other. That's what they're trying to do. And that's what you do. You get Gentiles to fight each other, and you get Shia and Sunni to fight each other, and you get everybody. As long as they're fighting, as long as the Gentiles are fighting, the Jews are happy because that's what they want. They want to take over the world, and they have this big speed bump of 7 billion people they got to get rid of. And there are 16 to 40 million people. So how do you do that? How do you accelerate that? Oh, nuclear war. You get nuclear weapons, nuclear war. Now we're in a situation where they can accelerate everything. They have two things that they, in this world right now, that they have never had before. They have a pogrom getaway car in Israel. So where if there was a pogrom and the Gentiles rose up and kicked them all out, they would have a place to go.
Yeah. A place for all the cornered rats of the world to gather together and unleash war on everyone.
Right.
No extradition policy with any country.
But see, that's the way the left-winger sees Israel. Now, the way the right-winger, the Likud, the Benjamin Netanyahus of the world, they see Genesis 15:18, and I am entitled to this land deed. Genesis 15:18 is my land deed, and from the Nile to the Euphrates is mine. And everybody else needs to get out or be killed, the Gentiles. And I don't understand why all the Jews of the world just don't come home and live here. And the left-wing Jew and the Wall Street Jew, and not necessarily left-wing or right-wing, but Wall Street Jew, Hollywood Jew, the globalist Jew, they're like, why would I want to live in a dumpy desert like Israel? It's like, I could just live here and live in paradise. I have a mansion in Malibu. Why would I want to?
Right.
So then there comes this great divide. But you know that they're working off of each other. And one of the things that this date specifically signifies to me is that the real reason JFK was killed was because he refused all funding to Israel if they didn't allow nuclear inspections. Mm-hmm. So that was something that would be very on the pro-right-wing side of the Jewish paradigm. But he gets killed off for rejecting the Fabian Society, which is on the far left of it. So in a way, it's symbolic.
Well, I would say JFK did a lot of things that pissed the Kahila off.
Right. He pissed both sides off.
Yeah. Right.
And this is what symbolizes to me is that they are working together because the left wing killed him and the right wing killed him.
Yeah. Was it Ben-Gurion who stepped down, I think, right?
Ben-Gurion, yes.
Yeah, Ben-Gurion.
As soon as he sent that letter off, Ben-Gurion almost immediately stepped down and the process for the assassination began. I would say when Ben-Gurion stepped down. Oh yeah,
I think that they were looking at it from a variety of different lenses. But once that happened, it was more like, go get him now. I'm sick of it. I'm done with it. We're not dealing with this guy anymore. And if you talk about it like from that perspective, LBJ was probably the best person to have there.
Absolutely. And the reason LBJ was the best president that Israel ever had. Mm-hmm. And the reason being, he had pure chutzpah. I mean, he had a Donald Trump type personality. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, he was very much a whore.
Yeah. One of the biggest.
And to find somebody like that is rare. Because, you go with... Now, the Bushes were close to an extent. They had, the Republican Party likes to parade itself like this John Wayne type party. Yeah. But really, most of the modern presidents and hot politicians, the neoconservatives, were just nothing more than Democrats that infiltrated the Democratic Party. And when you look at H.W. Bush, when he ran in '88, one of the things they called him was a wimp, and then he had to. Oh, I'm not a wimp. I'm going to... And then, the Iraq War gave him that macho image that he did not have when he ran in 1988.
Even though it really wasn't, because they just slaughtered them on the highway of death afterwards. After they left, they just murdered them from the sky, you know?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Especially after they had a massive 8-year war with Iran. It's like they're totally decimated militarily, and they never recovered because America just keeps going back for the 13th time and just slaughters them again.
And they pushed Saddam into doing that by giving him the okay, the wink nod, to let him know, hey, go ahead, we're not going to say anything when it came to Kuwait. And that's why he did what he did. And that's, what they used as casus belli to basically say, hey, we're gonna destroy this country. To this day, I mean, even Cheney, before they went again in 2003, he said that, the 1991 job was kind of a hatchet job and they didn't finish the job. But basically, in a lot of ways, they did, because then they followed it up with sanctions and killed millions of people just from the sanctions alone. So Iraq has probably, you can argue, in the modern age, has suffered the most out of all the different countries that organized Jewish interests have foisted wars upon all these different nations. But I would say Iraq, unfortunately, has gotten the worst end of that. And also just considering all the different players that they've installed there, and then they minimize support for them, and now you have a vacuum where, for example, ISIS jumps in by design.
Yeah, and you wonder if, with the way they hold generational grudges, if, like, when they look at Iraq, they're seeing King Nebuchadnezzar. It's like, you really wonder if because that's the Jewish mentality. It's like, let's just hold grudges against people. Yes, Iraq is between the Nile and the Euphrates, and they're going to suffer, and it's like Palestinians suffer. Anything between the Nile and the Euphrates is going, because Jews believe that's theirs.
What happened right after the invasion in 2003 is that Netanyahu sent in his people to make sure they stole all the Jewish books of magic that people don't realize. A lot of that stuff is now coming out with this whole weird, dark, black magic crap that, these politicians are involved in. But he found ancient books of Jewish magic in Iraq, and they were hand-delivered to him. Because they knew that, Saddam was sitting on a treasure chest of all types of, historical relics. And if you look at the way that ISIS has been conducting the war in Iraq and Syria, they specifically are destroying Christian places of ancient significance, because what people don't understand with organized Jewish interests is that they hate the Christians way more than they hate the Muslims. They almost feel like a kind of, maybe I would even argue, like a brotherhood with the Muslims on a public level, not privately, but on a public level. It's almost like, oh, the Muslims were that little brother that grew up and became too strong, and of course they need to be repelled and stopped. But they look at it like, oh, well, they have a law, we have a law, and they respect our prophets, etc. So they're not as bad as the Christians who created this fake Messiah who has terrorized us with his peaceful teachings for 2,000 years. That's one of the things that people don't understand when it comes to Christianity. They hate Christians. They despise them, and they
see them as Romans.
Yeah. And they have a historical antagonism with them because they, of course, after Christianity, after maybe you could even argue the Council of Nicaea, after that, Christianity became very prominent, very powerful, and there was retributive actions taken against Jews. Maybe not in every single case it was retributive, but in most cases it was, and it was a historical antagonism for causing, in their mind, the death of Jesus Christ. So there was this antagonism that's kind of never really stopped, and it took the Schofield Bible in the was it 1800s or
it was 1909
where now you have Christian Zionism as a huge phenomenon, and these people are not starting to see it. But with the Trump election, I think a lot of Christian Zionists are going to wake up. In fact, on my page I have a young fellow, and I'm not going to mention his name for his safety, but he's very much been a Christian Zionist his entire life, and I think this is going to be the opportunity where we can poke a hole through that concept and say, hey, look, Christian Zionism hasn't helped you. Tying yourself to Israel hasn't helped you. These are not the chosen people. And even if you look at it from a historical or biblical perspective, these are not the chosen people because they have let go of the rope of God. They rejected Jesus. They persecuted Jesus, and they will do so again if Jesus was to descend on earth again.
But if you are a Christian, then you believe Jesus made a new covenant.
That's right.
Which makes the old covenant irrelevant.
That's right.
And when you understand that testament and covenant mean the same thing, then your Old Testament is a Jewish storybook. It's irrelevant. It's the irrelevant testament. It's what we should call it. Instead of saying the old, because a lot of people think in chronological order, oh, new, old. No, it's the irrelevant testament. So I think from now on, we should call it the irrelevant testament.
Even if that was not the case historically and through the process of religious rejuvenation, you can look at the book itself. This is not the same book that was revealed 3,300 years ago. This has been interpolated over and over and over again. And what specifically the Jews have done in this book now is that they have poisoned the history of the prophets. You know, and as Islam, we're both Muslim, we recognize the prophets are unblemished as individuals. That's why they became prophets, because they were here to guide the rest of us, because they had lived unblemished lives. They didn't actively engage in anything that was against divine teaching throughout history. So what the Jews sought to do is destroy that notion that these were pure and pious people, and that's why they have horrendous stories about Abraham or David or even Noah. And what they do, then they derive stories from those stories that they've manufactured. And so now, you know, you have the Curse of Ham mythology that basically condemns black people to slavery in perpetuity to all non-blacks. And as a result, these stories have stuck. And that's why when you look at the psychotic collective that is organized Jewry, you will notice these these themes permeate through their understanding of reality. So even though you'll see a lot of Jews hanging out with black folks and pretending that they're down, etc., they hold these animosities. And if you look at it from just, you can even ask some of these black athletes or celebrities, whoever, who have Jewish friends, and the reason why, it's a strategic thing. It's basically like, hey, we're all minorities against the evil white man, and I'm not white, I'm a Jew, but when it's convenient, I'll be white. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
And they've done this thing where they've made these tacit alliances with black people, and not just black people. Now it's happening with Muslims. You see ISNA recently, because of the whole Donald Trump phenomenon, is now trying to work with, I think it's the AJC, what is that, American Jewish Congress? They got so many different groups.
Oh, totally.
It could be that one, but it could be another one. But anyway, there's a Muslim-Jewish unity in the face of the angry white man in America, which is a totally nonsensical paradigm to begin with. But this is how they have accomplished their goals. They're such a small group. They can't accomplish their things if they were just like, hey, we hate the whole planet and we're going to destroy everyone. You see what I'm saying? Right. Trying to do that, that's how you get pogromed, right? Yeah. Legitimately.
But that's the zealot mentality, the Likud mentality.
Right.
So the left wing has to play off of that.
Right. And then they also have the notion of, oh, look at how crazy the right wing is. For example, Max Blumenthal. His father, Sidney, is attached at the hip with the destructive old power and the old guard of the Clintons and all these other administrations. And he, you can argue, is one of the architects of the Libya invasion and the installation of ISIS in Libya, right? And the whole Benghazi debacle and things like that. People don't realize that, but that's Max Blumenthal's dad. They still spend time together. In fact, Sidney Blumenthal, Max Blumenthal's father, was forwarding negative articles about Israel from Max Blumenthal to Hillary Clinton. And Hillary was like, oh, this is so wonderful, and that's great that Max is doing this. So you'd see that on the one hand, the son is supposedly one of the chief, let's say, propagandists / antagonizers of Israel. Right, and he's supposedly antagonizing Israel on behalf of Palestinians, Max Blumenthal, and his father is installing ISIS in Libya. And we're supposed to believe that, oh, these are the good Jews that want to help us. And now we have, of course, plenty of House Browns, as I like to call them, like Linda Sarsour, Ali Abu Nima, and so many others who are the buffer. So the common person like me, let's say that's, very pro-Palestine, very well educated on these subjects and everything, an activist, we get stopped by the buffer of Ali Abu Nima or the Linda Sarsours who are like, no, we're not going to talk about organized Zionist interests outside of this particular issue. And that, Jews are our allies in this cause. Well, if you look at Israel as a Jewish enclave, which is a place where, the most horrendous Jewish behaviors collectively kind of coalesce, you can't argue that that's not Jewish. They call it Jewish. They call themselves the Jewish state. So the idea that there's a whole bunch of good Jews in this occupational cancer that exists in the Middle East, Israel, that are here for us, that are here to help us, and we should not condemn them. And we should not look at their Judaism as a reason why they've created this cancerous entity. Whereas, in fact, it actually has everything to do with it. Because if you took the Talmud out, you took the Old Testament stories out, you took the Zohar and the Kabbalah out, these people wouldn't have the ideological basis to create such a devastating entity that's, destructive all around the world. that has tentacles all around the world, you know? And so to me, it's just so funny that these Muslims and these brown folks and these Arabs and these Palestinians are willing to take a back seat in their own, freedom quest, in their own attempt to get redress and, sovereignty, that they're going to be willing to take a back seat to the Jews who have never helped them, who have never done anything tangible to dismantle this cancerous entity in the Middle East. You see, and all it is a gatekeeper. It's a buffer. It's like, okay, now we're going to talk about this, but let's not talk about this. Okay, fine, we'll talk about this, but let's not talk about this. And these people are constantly deceiving, so they'll give you whatever you want. Oh, Islamophobia is such a big, bad problem. A lot of my brothers in the community, whether it's my specific community, the Ahmadiyya community, or even outside when we talk about the internet and Muslims and activists, etc., they're now towing the Jew line when it comes to Donald Trump and his appointments of so-called white nationalists and so-called Islamophobes, when meanwhile these are the people that are the main reason Islamophobia even existed, where they created 9/11 and totally dismantled everyone's perception of what Muslims believe and teach. And now with that giant mythology that they established through 9/11, which was one of the greatest hoaxes of all time in terms of who we blame and what the destructive power that they created with that. Now we're supposed to believe that these people are on our side and are here to stop the same Islamophobia that 5 years ago under Bush they were pushing so hard. You see, so what's happening now is that because Obama refuses to say radical Islamic terrorism or radical jihadi terrorism, which is a new phenomenon even in his administration. It's not something that existed 08, 09 or 2009, 2010. This is something that's more recent. They installed ISIS in Libya. They are facilitating the installation of ISIS in Syria. It took Russian assistance and Iranian assistance and Hezbollah assistance to help Syria prevent ISIS from taking over. So all these radical jihadi groups are coming from the same source. So while Obama is literally creating a jihadi, I wouldn't even call it jihadi because that's like, that's like putting jihad in a negative sense. These people are basically terrorists, and he's installing terrorists and then at the same time not decrying them. And by not decrying them, the Muslims, these foolish idiots, are so stupid they think, oh, he's not saying anything against the radical Islamic terror because he doesn't want to sully our good name. So meanwhile, he is sullying your good name and killing you through this group that they've installed all throughout, so many different countries, but specifically Libya and Syria and Iraq. But at the same time, of course, he's not addressing it. So these people who are not paying attention to what's really happening are just totally misled and fooled by this, And like in our community, there's been some individuals who've been brought to the White House to, do their salat, do their prayers. And they think of these things as such magnificent and wonderful things that they're willing to overlook what's actually taking place. And the reason why, because of course we know about the left is that they put cute words, adorable words around their evil actions. So you don't consider their evil actions as evil because you're looking at them from the lexicon that they created, So this is what really bothers me as I'm seeing Muslims, even so-called awake Muslims who understand that this is a war on terror, a war on Islam. They also have been misled by this, like, oh, white racism is here to get you, and Donald Trump is bringing in a wave of white nationalism and white hatred. And we can get into that, but I just want to get your reaction and thoughts on that specifically. Just the idea that, the left has been so successful at, marshaling Muslim support for what it's doing because of their the way their lexicon works and the way that how they describe all of these things works. It just diffuses all the resistance that would naturally exist in a right-wing administration like the Bushes, where you see, oh, they're against me and look, they're bombing everyone else in the world, so I'm not with this. Whereas with Obama, it's like, oh, he won the Peace Prize, and he's really here to mend the fences and really just bring all minorities together and defend minorities against the the onslaught of these angry white racists that just became angry and racist for no reason.
Out of human decency and basic human rights of what you should do to a person, if you make an accusation against a person, you should have a reason why and proof why.
Like white nationalist or white supremacist.
Right. So when you come out and you want to accuse Trump or Jeff Sessions or any of these people of racism, have a reason why. And if you have a reason why, I will refute your reason. But when you come at me and say Trump is a racist, why? Because he has some loose... Why? Because David Duke endorsed him? That's on David Duke. David Duke endorsed him. I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer can endorse a candidate. And it's like, what? That should have no bearing on that. And the thing about it is, in 2000, he disavowed David Duke in the 2000 election.
Right, and specifically on his own without being, asked to by the media or individuals. He did that on his own because he felt like David Duke...
he endorsed Pat Buchanan.
Right. And just because you mentioned Jeffrey Dahmer, I want to point out that John Podesta, who is the Hillary's campaign manager, who is now implicated in child rape and child torture, had an image, number one, of a dissection in his office, of a human dissection in his office, which is, okay, fine, that's an ancillary evidence, that's circumstantial. Then this man is also, he has in his home an image, the way that Jeffrey Dahmer chopped off the head of one of his male victims, and he's kind of like, it's like an arched back with the head missing. He has the exact same sculpture in his home. So the idea of like talking about how Trump is racist, and then you mentioned Jeffrey Dahmer, these guys are doing an ode to Jeffrey Dahmer.
Oh yeah.
And this is in the open.
But see, you gave me a reason. That's what they don't do. They don't give you a reason.
Yeah.
Like, give me a reason. The root of the Jeff Sessions being a racist came from a 1986 when he got rejected for the state's Supreme Court because he was against the ACLU and the NAACP.
Well, tell them about the history of the ACLU, because I think that that's important. People don't get it. People think that the ACLU is like just out here to support all marginalized communities, and that's their primary goal.
It's to cherry pick the Judeofied liberal Marxist agenda.
Okay.
They were the ones that got Darwin in our schools. Took
the prayers out of the schools.
Took prayers out of the schools. They're affecting the relations. And like you said before, it's like an anti-Christian almost type.
Absolutely.
And they basically exploited all minorities to try to get their agenda out. It very much fits the Saul Alinsky tactic of using morality to get the material. And so what you have to do is... Like, one of the founding members was Helen Keller. There were like 15 people who were the founding members of the ACLU. Like, Helen Keller was, and one of my favorite articles is on Tomato Bubble about her being a fraud. And I think she might have just been someone who was like hard of hearing and legally blind and got exploited up to be this national figure. And I think like Mark Twain, when he said that Anne Sullivan was the miracle worker with her, I think he was being sarcastic. But the reason why is you need to have this pity superhero. It's where you need to have someone who's deaf and blind and who overachieves because you need to milk that. And that's the essence of the ACLU, is that you milk the minority's plight. You don't better the minority.
No.
You just milk their plight. Yeah. Milk the pity cow. And that's...
Use identity politics to make them feel like you're on their side, whereas you don't show them any tangible difference in their material being, and you use and exploit their anger and hatred and hostility and redirect it towards this, white Christian, nation, essentially, and the leaders of that nation, or the dominant majority group in that nation, and basically create a fifth column group, within the country. And not just the ACLU, but the SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center. And of course, if you look at the finances of these groups, and if the IRS was a legitimate organization, they would audit these groups and find out where they're getting their money from, because that would give you a lot of insight into what their agenda is. Why is it that they're so active in these minority communities, and what specifically are they doing?
Well, I mean, Martin Luther King took communist money from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and basically that's what the civil rights movement did, was it Marxified the black culture. And that's what like Mandela's movement in South Africa. I think that just Marxified the culture. There are hundreds of black leaders that were at the time of Martin Luther King. Why is it the one that gets the most mainstream press and the most mainstream media is the one who takes the communist money? And the same thing with South Africa. So you really have to question that. And what it did was they took Marxist values. It's like we have to be dependent upon the state to help us out instead of trying to create our own sovereignty, create our own business, create our own entrepreneurship, find ways to dig our way out of this hole. And there were black nationalists who had that message and were shunned. Mm-hmm. And you can make a long list of them. It's like you start with Booker T. Washington, and you can go to Marcus Garvey, and you can go to the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X, Farrakhan today. It's like anybody that has the message now with the Obama administration, anybody has a message of black people need to get off their ass and improve their culture, it gets shunned. I mean, Bill Cosby had that message, and now look what happened to him. There had to be something behind that smear campaign.
Wow, and it was so profound and so massive that that they were just waiting for an opportunity to do this. And what it does is it takes someone who independently elevated himself and his condition and put so much darkness on them and put so much evil on them that model in and of itself, that self-sufficient, intelligent, stalwart man is now, a hideous creature. And you can't ever even emulate any of those things that he did that got him to the point where he got to, you see? Mm-hmm. And they're literally trying to destroy him on his last several years, maybe in life, So it's like, this is what they do. This is what they've done. This is the reason why they'll have a girl like Miley Cyrus, appear in a Disney show and make her seem so wholesome and whatever, to have a generation of females admire her and try to model their lives after her, and then all of a sudden they turn her into
bait and switch. Yep.
A total, a whore. That's very openly a whore, and encouraging young girls who would ostensibly follow in her footsteps to also become whores, and to make it seem like this new whore paradigm is something that's very beneficial to women or to young girls or to society at large.
I wonder how long they've been planning that.
You see, and this is not the first time. Mm-hmm. Britney Spears, it was the same type of thing.
Oh yeah.
And they bring them in from a young age. They have like the Disney group. I forgot what the group was, or the Mickey Mouse group that they had created.
With Christina Aguilera,
Timberlake was there. Christina Aguilera, Britney Spears, and they literally cultivate them from a young age. And then when they do the switch and they turn them into these horrific creatures, it's like your childhood is stolen. It's almost
Britney,
like
there's some like Manchurian thing going on there.
Yes. There's something much deeper. She's got Svengalis all over the place, and when it comes to the entertainment industry, I think that there's just so much dark and devilish stuff that's happening behind the scenes that they allude to in music videos and things like that. One subject that I want to address, because it's, I think, high time, is that, number one, congratulations to you, congratulations to me, and all the intelligent, sentient goyim out here that we're now able to breathe just a little bit easier, that Donald Trump was able to make it into the presidency.
Well, here's one thing I would say about that is the game is not over yet.
No, it's just beginning.
But even with the election, I think there's still 2 seconds left on the clock. They got to go the full court, and we're up by 3.
Yeah.
So they can get a shot off and rig the Electoral College.
That's true.
It might not be practical. It might be, the odds might be against that. But don't ever think, two things that I think are setting people at ease that should not set people at ease is this whole, well, there would be riots and that's exactly what a George Soros would want. George Soros loves riot. I mean, Black Lives Matter, everything with him, Alinsky.
These protests, where these little, 18-year-old kids who have no concept of politics, no concept of economy, no concept of independence, or, I don't even know what the right word would be, but just like the idea of raising yourself up. None of these kids have any concept of any of this stuff, and teachers are encouraging them to leave school and go protest, and they don't even have their own concepts in terms of what to put on a sign, so the teachers are giving them the signs. And there's ads on Craigslist for protesting for $1,500 a week, which I was doing the calculations on that. I'm assuming this is cash. More than likely it's cash, and more than likely it's you can't follow the trail tax wise. $1,500 a week comes out to $6,000 a month, I believe, and $6,000 a month if it's untaxed, that would be close to what is 115,000 according to our current tax system after tax, if that's what they're getting. So maybe, yeah, obviously they don't work 40 hours a week, and maybe they're not getting paid every single week, but in terms of the actual amount of money, there's more money in protesting for Soros than there is in many industries and many other job posts and things like that. Mm-hmm. So there's plenty of reason to protest if you're going to get paid $100,000 a year, essentially, to protest.
Well, this is a guy that, on paper, has about $12 billion, but with all his slush funds...
It's in the $100 billions.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And so he could very easily rig... Like, if you wanted to rig the Electoral College, how much do you think it would take to bribe an electorate? I mean, seriously. These people are not government officials. They're not... And I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying it's like the basketball analogy where we have to go full court with 2 seconds left on the clock and we're up by 3. So it could happen. But I've actually been playing around on the internet with this interactive electoral map. And the only practical way that I think it could be overturned is if they rig Texas.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that.
Because it's 38 electoral votes. And that would swing it to where it was, it would be 270, which is the exact number she needs to win, and 268. And to get the majority, he would need to rig 20 electorates for that to happen, because you need a majority within the 38 electorates. So now keep in mind that would be the state that would probably have the best riots for Trump. And the other thing about that is that's the home of the Bush family. That's the home of Rick Perry, Ted Cruz, Dick Cheney. So you have a lot of people, neoconservatives, that would play along with something like that.
Facilitate the intrigue.
Right. It would be very hard to execute, but I'm not saying that it's not going to happen. So what we need to do is, much like in basketball, we need to all, with 2 seconds left on the clock, need to guard our man and not let some sneaky shot get off.
Right.
So it's a matter of just us playing defense right now.
But one other thing about this. So he's, obviously the ball is in his court. Yesterday I read an article, multiple articles that said that he brought in the media, the deceptive, lying Jew media, to his offices in the Trump Tower in New York, and basically berated everybody viciously and called them all liars. I think his name is Jeff Zucker. He's one of the lead guys in charge in CNN. He specifically pointed him out and said that you have nothing but a group of liars that work for CNN, and CNN is one of the greatest lying outlets that there exist. Mm-hmm. Of course, Wolf Blitzer was there. Even Charlie Rose was there. So many other individuals are there. Its story got leaked that this is what happened. From that perspective, of course, it's a smart move, and this guy's a very intelligent man. Just because
liars.
He sounded... Right, with three brackets around it. This guy's a very intelligent man. You don't get to this position pretty much by yourself, without any support, any assistance, without being a highly intelligent man. Despite what people say, despite the stupid things that he has said as well, I think his overall approach is highly intelligent. And this, to me, is a very smart move, because you're letting them know, hey, the American public has already seen through your lies. That's why I got to this point. Now you have an opportunity to play ball and not, take it too far and try to destroy my administration or try to, spread lies about us. Obviously, he's worked on trying to get libel laws. He's going to try to work on getting libel laws set up so journalists who make up stories about individuals, and obviously important individuals like the president and, his cabinet, they will have to face, a legal challenge to what they've done, and also possibly lose money. We saw this very much in the Gawker situation with the Hulk Hogan thing, where they published a porno of his, and then a private porno. He didn't publish it on his own, and then also his private comments about how he didn't want black people marrying his daughter, which of course he has the right to do. Every individual has that right to say, hey, I don't want my daughter marrying such and such people. And this is not, if you want to call it racist, then of course you're going to have to call Muhammad Ali racist. You're going to have to call Malcolm X racist because they said the same thing. And
Absolutely.
in fact, if you look at white nationalists and black nationalists, they say essentially the same thing.
Right.
The idea that separation is best and let us do our thing and you do your thing, right? So in fact, there's a tacit alliance in that respect between black nationalists and white nationalists. And that's why a guy like former KKK leader David Duke endorsed Trump, and so did Louis Farrakhan. But what I wanted to address specifically is beyond just that. It's the intrigue around who he's appointing. So Steve Bannon, people don't know much because the Jew media is going to give you what you want to know, and then you're going to run with it because that's what people have been doing. People are calling him a white nationalist and all these other things, more derogatory terms than that, because of his nationalism, which I am a nationalist, you're a nationalist. Civic nationalism is something that's very common in many countries, and it's something that the globalists, i.e., globalist Jews, are trying to eradicate out of the minds of the common people. And that's why they have to have open borders, because they're going to bring in people who don't have any historical attachment to the native, the nation state, as it were, and they're just there to exploit for their own benefit. And that's what illegal immigrants, for example, have done, and illegal Mexicans specifically have done in the United States, where they're given a wink nod that, hey, you'll be fine, just come in and drop your baby right at the 9th month, and then you'll be able to stay here as long as you want. Not only that, but when they work, all of their money is untaxed. It goes in through the system without being taxed. It goes to Mexico and gets slightly taxed. A lot of that money goes to Carlos Slim, who now owns the New York Times, as a propaganda outlet for facilitating more illegal immigration. And they also get so many other benefits that citizens don't get. They also have committed crimes, violent crimes against citizens, specifically black citizens, because they end up occupying similar areas in cities, especially sanctuary cities, which Chicago under Rahm Emanuel is trying to become, and San Francisco has been for a very, very long time. So people have been attacking the Steve Bannon appointment. Steve Bannon to me seems like maybe even a genius, a very intelligent person who's had his hands in so many different things. He works as an investment banker for Goldman Sachs. He's been in Hollywood. He's been in so many different parts of the the United States, and from an intellectual perspective, even at Breitbart, he's pushed out a whole new narrative where the dominant liberal, specifically media, has not addressed these subjects, and that's why now you see Obama and other parts of this establishment coming out and saying we're going to stop the fake news being spread at Facebook and Google, because it was, of course, this so-called fake news that facilitated the rise of Trump, because individuals such as myself, yourself, other individuals, thousands and thousands of us were out there aggressively pushing what Trump was really about, against the mainstream liberal Jewish narrative that he was some type of monster and some type of figure that was going to be the harbinger of all types of destructive things, disintegration of society. But beyond just Steve Bannon, they've said that about Flynn. The admiral, I think he was either an admiral or somebody. He was at the Defense Intelligence, I think, under Obama, and the Obama administration essentially demanded that he train ISIS, and he bucked and became insubordinate and refused to, help the Obama administration train ISIS, and of course they fired him. And what's interesting about him is people are talking about, well, he has this irrational anti-Islam hatred. Let me give you the context of why he would have such a thing. The reason why is because the Obama administration created ISIS, funded ISIS, trained and armed ISIS, and then they tried to install ISIS in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya. Of course, they were successful. They created the transport routes for the black gold oil, leaving Libya, going to places like Turkey, in Batman, for example, in Turkey. So because of that, and because he's being antagonized by the same Obama administration for ringing the alarm, for being a whistleblower and saying, hey, what are we doing here? This is ISIS. We're not supposed to be training ISIS. They shut him down, got him quiet, took him out of his position. So now Trump, who is legitimately against ISIS, who knows the origins of ISIS, who's called out Obama and Clinton for supporting and basically being the founders of ISIS, is going to bring this guy in as the national security advisor. So what people don't understand is, why would he write a book against radical Islam? Well, he's seeing the pushback from his own government. He sees that Obama is not talking about radical Islamic terrorism, so he puts two and two together. On the one hand, we're training ISIS. On the other hand, we're not even allowed to talk about it because of political correctness. So when you see that kind of thing, you feel from a resistance perspective that I have to resist this new paradigm where the Muslims are being imposed on me. Huma Abedin would have been arguably one of the most powerful people in the world had Clinton got in. You know, and Huma Abedin is a Muslim Brotherhood operative, which is another arm where Al-Qaeda originated. And clearly she has a un-Islamic marriage with Anthony Weiner, who is probably out there raping kids with everyone else. And he's a Jew. According to Islam, if she was a legitimate Muslim, she wouldn't even be allowed to be married to a Jew. This is a marriage of convenience that facilitates the connection between Jews and Muslims on a level where you would be able to observe it, and on a deeper level within the government apparatus where they've tried to wed their two not only narratives but also agendas together. So it's like a Jewish Islamic takeover of the United States. So what do you expect white people to react to that with? Oh no, we should just let them all in and be happy about this, and this is like a wonderful thing. No, a white nationalist, or a white person who is a nationalist, which to me is a more accurate definition of what a white nationalist is going to be against that, because now the power structure is pushing this narrative. So you as a Muslim, as a common Muslim who sees this, you should not be on the side of the Obama administration just because they don't say radical jihadi terror or radical Islamic terrorism, because you should recognize that they're the ones installing ISIS. ISIS is killing Muslims. During Ramadan, I think it was like 400 to 500 Muslims that were killed by ISIS. Right? So if you have 500 Muslims killed during the most holy month by the so-called jihadi group, and then you have a president that's not talking about it, yet he's the one who created them, you should recognize if a white person or whoever comes out against that and says, hey, we have to deal with this radical jihadi threat. It went from 18 countries, or it went from 5 countries to 18, and now maybe arguably 30 plus countries where this group is festering, including Gaza. In Palestine, including Afghanistan. You would think, why are they there? Including even Kashmir, where they have those black flags waving. And, obviously there's some money being funneled to these groups. Mm-hmm. And of course, Trump is aware of this. Trump has talked about how the biggest banks in the world are facilitating funding ISIS openly on mainstream media.
Who buys their oil.
So this is the whole point, is that when you look at a guy like Flynn, you have to look at him in the context of being an American nationalist, being someone who was at the highest levels of intelligence and refusing the Obama orders to train and arm and fund ISIS, and he bucked against that, right? So he's technically a whistleblower. And as a result, Trump bringing him into a key position, national security advisor, is so phenomenal. And a lot of these people who talk against him, they haven't even watched him in his interviews. He had an interview with RT where, a very aggressive, or actually I think it might have been Al Jazeera, where there's a very aggressive, Muslim, identity politician essentially was interrogating him and asking him questions. And he was like, no, ISIS kills more Muslims than anybody else. The Muslims should be the ones out here against ISIS. Now, on this same vein, there's a new situation where Trump is considering a guy named Mike Rogers for a very important position somewhere in the intelligence community, who is currently the head of the NSA and is also the head of CENTCOM, which they are trying to destroy that thing. So he's kind of the head of two very important organizations that have to do with national security, intelligence, etc. And they want to split that down the line. That's why he ended up still being in control, because they wanted to create a big division and then kind of demote him from there. And he, again, is an American patriot. He just now, on the 17th of November, flew without alerting any of his superiors to go have a meeting with Donald Trump. And what he was supposedly exposing was a false flag operation that was underway, where what they call a doomsday plane. I think it looks like it's a Boeing E-6 Mercury plane that is only in the skies in the event of a nuclear strike. And he saw that this was happening, and he recalled that, and then he asked for an immediate opportunity to speak to Trump. And now he spoke to Trump. So now that whatever false flag plot may have been in operation behind the scenes, now Trump is fully aware. And guess what? At the same time, here it is on the Washington Post, the heads of the Pentagon and national intelligence community have recommended to President Obama that the director of the National Security Agency, Admiral Michael Rogers, be removed, because he is now causing a problem. Because one of the things that I thought when I saw that Trump became the president-elect was, what are they going to do now? what kind of false flag operation do they have now where they can either extend Obama or, in martial law, as we talked about on a previous podcast with Obamacare, or, create such a crisis. Like if for example, let's say there is a nuclear attack in a major city like Chicago or anywhere else, the Obama administration has to react to it. Right. And now Trump has to kind of, to a certain degree, be boxed in with whatever approach that Obama uses.
That's why I thought it would be smart to happen before the election.
Yeah. Well, that's what would have made more sense, because now you don't have the animosity of people saying, wait a second, you had a false flag after all of this time, and such a massive false flag after Trump got in, Mm-hmm. And so to me, from that perspective, it's not a good situation. Now, of course, even after Trump gets in, even after, let's say, 6 to 8 months pass by, if Rahm Emanuel wants to, create a nuclear false flag in Chicago, for example, Trump is still going to have to address it. He's still going to have to, have the right people in charge to be able to investigate it appropriately in order to find out who really did it, because, what we can't underestimate the quote-unquote chutzpah of organized Jewry. They are audacious. They are bold enough to do something so massive, so destructive, that they will try to manipulate public opinion into going after Russia or Iran or whoever, because if you kill 10,000 people on, let's say, live television in America, what do you think the reaction is going to be?
That's why I thought they were going to happen in the World Series. I mean, you had all eyes on Chicago right now. What perfect time would there have been?
Yeah, and, of course, the other thing is that the Jews have been doing this for a very long time. They've seen people like Trump. They've seen people like Hitler. They've seen people like Cornelio Codreanu. So they have a long-term agenda that they've spent centuries, if not millennia, trying to, create this new global tyrannical communist government. And what Obama was is just a stepping stone to full-blown communism, because what they're trying to do, we call it socialism. I think socialism may not be the right word specifically, just because it's really about communism. It's really about taking identity politics to a whole nother level where everybody...
I think if you put Fabian in front of the socialism, it actually makes more sense.
Yeah.
Because socialism can be national socialism, where you have a nationalist social, where people's ideals are represented and everything is sorted out equally, then yes.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why they would get rid of a guy like Mike Rogers also is that he has probably the most expansive resume as it relates to cybersecurity. And as we know, a lot of the cybersecurity companies are headquartered in Israel. They have a lot of backdoor access into our most secure and most important intelligence communities and agencies through their computer networks. This is, of course, how they helped pull off 9/11. And this guy is very much aware of these things. And to have him at the head of the NSA and CENTCOM is clearly a problem for them. That's why they're clearly recommending his removal. But guess what? He made the smart decision, a so-called insubordinate decision, did not follow military protocol, where he went to President-elect Trump and probably gave him all of his knowledge and awareness of what's happening in terms of the intrigue behind the scenes that we are not privy to. Another thing that we are not privy to, and this is an unconfirmed report, I don't have the exact source on it, but people have suggested that if people were watching the election, the night of the election, there was a pause right around the late night. I think it was maybe 1 a.m. Eastern time, where the electoral votes were at 242, I believe, and 215, 242 Trump, 215 Clinton, and it just stopped. Nothing else was coming through, no numbers were changing, and it was like for a whole hour. Some unconfirmed reports suggest that what happened at that time was the CIA started to realize that the Trump phenomenon was becoming really real. There was no way that they could overturn it, so they hacked all these central systems for the voting, because they have proven that it can be hacked. And the good people on the ground were paying attention and knew that the hack was coming from the CIA. And they say that some people were in military, I think there were even some fighter jets or something else, above the CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, and they phoned into the CIA and said, we're watching you trying to steal this election. You better stop or we're going to drop a bomb on you right now. And I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but the CIA obviously at that point probably stopped doing the steal and allowed the natural voting process to take its course, and of course Trump won.
Well, Langley is like 10 miles from Washington, so yeah. I mean, the Pentagon and CIA is not that far away, so if they did something like that, it wouldn't be that hard.
Right, and that's the whole point, is that people were wondering, well, if it was rigged, how did Trump win? Well, first of all, you have a landslide effect that, no voting, no one or two voting centers can stop. It's like, just like an avalanche. You could stand in front of the avalanche, but, you're not going to be able to be successful at stopping it as a result. So similarly, I think that was part of it. The other part was, if you take California out, Trump won the popular vote, even with all the vote rigging and the fraud and the dead people voting and the minorities voting dozens of times. Even still, he won by 2 million votes if you took California out. And of course, California is where tens of millions of illegal immigrants voted. The other thing was, Obama encouraged these tens of millions of illegal immigrants to vote. Okay. And then recently, Obama just fined Colorado for not hiring illegals as policemen. $10,000. I mean, it's not a huge amount, but he fined them specifically because they didn't open up the opportunity for illegals to become part of the American police force. Now, you recognize, if you think about tens of millions of these people, and even if a few million of them are in the police force, how destructive that could be given the general high criminality rate among illegal immigrants. So you see, all of these things are being facilitated in the name of being good, in the name of taking care of these poor people. But really, that's just the way that that's what the socialists, that's what these people do, is that they give you the pretty words on the outside so you can, fall for the trick and think
it's Lucifer. Yeah.
Exactly. It's Luciferian and Orwellian and
Tikkun Olam. Yeah.
Tikkun Olam, like we talked about before. And for me, this thing is very important for common American citizens to recognize, because what's happening is the deep state, and that's the way we can put it. We should put 3 brackets around the deep state. But the deep state is basically trying to number one, usurp Trump's narrative. Meaning, like, for example, I just was showing you on the way here an article among a Jewish newspaper here locally where they were saying Trump's Jews and who they are. And they were, of course, grasping at straws. They were talking about his daughter, who's a Jew convert, or his grandchildren, or, for example, Boris Epstein, who, to me looks like a run-of-the-mill foot soldier Jew. And then, of course, Jared Kushner, who I think is the biggest danger and threat to the Trump administration, not only to his policies, but specifically to his very person. Specifically to his safety, because he's so close to Trump, and this guy is the son of a major Jewish criminal who was put away by Doug Christie, in fact, I think, or Chris Christie, excuse me. And there's a lot of intrigue surrounding that, but this was, the billionaire heir to the Kushner treasure, and which, of course, mostly came from real estate, but there was a lot of fraud, a lot of tax evasion, a lot of embezzlement, etc. So this is the guy who I would be the most scared of, most fearful of as a Trump supporter, given that he's that close to the White House. And my instincts are telling me there's something off with this guy. But essentially, they had to grasp at straws in terms of who are the Jews that we can liaison with and communicate with to have a voice in the White House, or have a voice that's right next to Trump's ear, that's going to, facilitate our agenda. Because they've been working at this for a very long time. With Clinton, if Clinton had gotten in, I mean, there would be no more America within a year or 2 years, because she would not even be running things. The deep state would now have all of its actors in the key positions. And of course, they have minorities all up in the Democratic Party, which serves to make minorities think that they have their best interests at heart, whether it's Mexicans, whether it's black people, whether it's Muslims. And now, unfortunately, the Muslims are going to get behind a guy named Keith Ellison, who is a Muslim convert who came through the NOI, the Nation of Islam, many, many years ago, and who is now a Soros acolyte, who is going to get his funds from Soros. Is he
still in the NOI?
No, I think he officially became probably Sunni Muslim, and has rejected the anti-Semitism of the NOI, because, of course, they needed him to do that. That was his public shaming event in order for him to engage in politics. But a lot of the Muslims are now going to follow him, and what they're literally openly suggesting is an insurrection, an opposition group created specifically against Trump, and saying the Trump election is such a unique thing in history, such a unique thing in American history, that it is going to require a broad-based coalition of minorities to oppose everything that he does. And Keith Ellison is, of course, is going to be the spearhead of that. It looks like that's the new leader of the DNC. And Soros just had a Democracy Alliance conference where Keith Ellison was one of the primary, most prominent individuals as they regroup and try to figure out what they're going to do in the aftermath of the Trump election. So the idea that now the good people won and we can just breathe easy and Trump's going to take care of everything and blah, blah, blah. No. This is actually the opportunity for us to, what we should do, in my opinion, is one of the most important things we can do is take advantage of the destruction, the public, brutal goring of the progressive lexicon, and take far more advantage of this and shove down everyone's throat these truths that, reflect Jewish criminality, organized Jewish criminality at the very top, at the very apex of these Western governments and these Western zogs, where, they control and wield so much influence over a society that, they use so many different deceptive means. So this is our opportunity to rail home the truth of 9/11, to bring home the truth of cultural Marxism and identity politics and how it's not helping people. It's actually a con. It's a major con for even the labor movements who think that, we're, strongly in support of this administration because X, Y, and Z, where the only thing they're doing is dividing people and making them think that in this free enterprise system that they don't have an opportunity for growing and for, elevating their own status, and specifically targeting the minority groups and putting them as 1 foot above slavery. And they needing all of these handouts and everything else because now you have a perpetual underclass that you can feed and then get the votes in to keep you in power. And then you give them a token black person, you give them a token Muslim, you give them a token Hispanic, and they think, oh, these people are down for us, whereas the Republican Party is just a white supremacist enclave and they have nothing for us. Now, you have to give a lot of credit where credit is due. Trump was very successful in getting the black vote and getting the Hispanic vote at the very last minute. A ton of Hispanic people voted for Trump, way more than Mitt Romney. Way more black people voted for Trump than Mitt Romney. In both cases, I think the blacks maybe have been about 20%, and Hispanics it was about 30%. And then if he's able to even bring in part of his agenda, which Steve Bannon articulated further, which was specifically bringing capitalism to the inner city, essentially, bringing in building up the infrastructure and doing other things in the inner city specifically to create new jobs. You see, the Trump effect has been so vast that in Bulgaria, we had a far-right group that's against globalism come into power right afterwards. You also had Apple, Trump has specifically been talking about Apple in terms of how they manufacture their product abroad, give all these jobs to all these other countries, essentially, and then bring their product back in with no tariff, no type of tax, and their biggest consumers are here in the United States. So all that Trump has to do is tell them, hey, if you don't manufacture this product in the United States, I'm going to charge you 35% tax, right? That's one thing. Mm-hmm. The other thing was, I'll let you bring in all that money that you have stored overseas that you never paid tax on. Just bring it in, and I'll let you bring all of that in for 10%. So Apple is already looking in the logistics of bringing back, at least one manufacturing plant to the United States. So is Ford. Ford was about to plan to leave Kentucky and go to Mexico, and they're saying, no, we'll probably end up staying. This is before this man has even gotten into office. All of these things are wonderful things that are going to have a trickle-down effect. Even if you're not in those places where these new jobs are going to be created, over time, it's going to facilitate economic movement and growth, which, despite the fact that they've kept artificially low interest rates for so long, they have not been able to grow the economy, and at any moment under the previous administration, if they even said that they were going to raise interest rates, it was devastating to the economy. So my assumption is that, the Jews at the Federal Reserve, which, Trump is going to have to deal with, are going to try to collapse the economy right away when he takes office. They're going to let Obama ride out on this notion that Obama fixed the problem with the bailouts, and now, we've had nothing but tremendous progress ever since, which is a total lie in terms of real unemployment numbers or any other metric. But I think that that's one of the things that Trump is going to have to face, in addition to the possibility of a false flag and so many other intrigues that could take place all around the world. But his approach to all of these things, to me, has been great. And in fact, I may disagree with one or two of his appointments, specifically the CIA director, because he's not only very bellicose against Iran, but he has a lot of ties to bad things in his past. But you have to recall, people said, why did Trump sit down with Kissinger? Okay, you're telling me that, Kissinger is going to dictate policy to him as a 90-year-old? Okay, fine. But then why did he sit down with Mitt Romney? because Mitt Romney was a vanquished enemy, was a vanquished foe who, he clowned on so effectively that, hey, you lost to Obama when, you had everything in your power to be able to stop him and you didn't do anything. And it was because of your laziness, because you didn't, travel the world, travel the United States. Trump was actually in 4 different locations the day before the election. He was giving a speech at like 1:00 in the morning, the night before the election in Michigan. And you could see the kind of passion that he put forth, and that's has a lot to do with why he won. So why meet with Mitt Romney? People are saying, oh, he's going to take orders from Kissinger. Is he going to take orders from Mitt Romney too, who he eviscerated? No, it's the idea of keeping your enemies close, seeing what they're thinking. You might be able to figure out what organized Jewry is going to do against you if you just openly talk to Kissinger as if you're asking for his advice, and he tells you certain things. And Kissinger is a shill for the globalists, right? Or the movement of globalism. I mean, he's talked about this openly, and bringing in UN peacekeeper troops when there's a crisis in an American city, So, and the destruction of American sovereignty and national sovereignty in the face of, a globalist kind of bureaucracy. So Kissinger, him sitting down with Kissinger, that's to get more information. That's to find out, maybe even assuage Kissinger, who's going to talk to organized Jewry and say, no, Trump is cool. I know that, he got in without our money and our assistance, but, he's not as crazy as you think. He's a stalwart supporter of Israel, and globalism is minor.
One thing, if you follow Kissinger, and one thing that, if from a Jewish perspective, you would have to be a little worried about Kissinger, he's got a big mouth. He says a lot of things that totally indict the Jewish people, and so if you get him to talk, he'll
there's
talk.
Evidence of him raping children as recently as a decade ago.
He's open about everything. He's a little too honest for his own good. He's almost like Joe Biden on steroids.
And the reason why that probably happens is that people get to a certain age where they don't care anymore.
Right.
Even like Trump. You think Trump would be trying to save America in his 50s? Hell no. He was enjoying his life.
Yeah.
Now he's like, well, I mean, I've already done everything. I'm going to die soon anyway. I mean, I can't live that long. Why not, try to do something? I mean, that's part of it maybe is his ego that's driving it, but it's a good thing. And he's doing it at the last stages of his life where there's no other ulterior motive, If you look at what he did in 2000, the way he communicated, it was not like this grandiose. It was not this aggressive. It's because of what he saw over the last 16 years that he was like, wait a second. Now, all those things that they were pushing on him, Pat Buchanan was pushing on him to promote these ideas like illegal immigration. Now there's just so much more awareness of it. The problem has become so vast that you have to talk about it. So if he had tried this approach in 2000, it wouldn't have even worked. But now with all of the destruction that, has been brought on by 8 years of a communist Obama, you see what, the general population is willing to listen to. And
well, you also have to go back to like 2000. We had budget surpluses and things like perception of everything being good. It was like a peacetime. I mean, people in like Kosovo and Yugoslavia and places like that wouldn't see it as peacetime. Even in Iraq, we were still bombing Iraq. But they had a peacetime mentality. It was you had budget surpluses. It may have all been a perception of utopia, but it's very hard to be an anti-establishment candidate when things are going well. And a lot of people say that Bush stole the election from Gore. I really don't see the difference between the two, except the fact that Gore all the time was supposed to be made out to be a political martyr. I really don't think Al Gore wanted to be president, because I think he would have protested even harder I think he made himself tons of money just by being this shill for global warming.
Yeah.
I think this is what he always wanted to do.
I think he went from being worth $5 million to over $150 million.
Yeah. And he wouldn't have done that as president. So his political martyrdom was the greatest thing that ever happened to him.
Yeah.
And George Bush, I think the thing that made George Bush so effective was that he was this coked up imbecile.
Yeah.
And it was so easy to sell everything that he's a coked up imbecile, and
Total
he's
idiot.
this puppet for his vice president, Dick Cheney, who's like Frankenstein and has heart transplants and
shoots his own friends in a hunting expedition.
And it's so easy to hate these two. It's like this coked up imbecile that comes from this rich family from oil wealth, and so it's like this whole Hollywood. You couldn't make a Hollywood movie any better about the two people that you would have to go destroy Iraq. Mm-hmm. But let's not forget that in 2000, he was the one who was going to pull us out of Iraq. And Gore wanted to keep troops there. That was one of the big things that Bush pushed for in the 2000 election. 9/11 changed all of that. So when we look at when two puppets go at each other in paradigm politics, all you really need is a false flag to turn everything around, and it makes everything irrelevant. Nobody really remembers the campaign promises. I mean, if you went on like a man on the streets from like 16 years ago, would people remember who was the anti-war candidate and who wasn't the anti-war candidate? So people don't remember campaign promises unless they're being promoted by the media. Like, when people talk about Bush's no new taxes from his 88 campaign, yeah, we remember that because the media puts that in our face every day. Because they really wanted, like Bush was pushing for a Israeli-Palestinian agreement, and I think the Likud was slightly against him for that. And I think that's what pushed Clinton into office. Is that I think the Likud actually wanted Bill Clinton, and then they found out Bill Clinton. They had spats with Bill Clinton. So they really haven't had their president since Lyndon Johnson.
One of the other things that Lyndon Johnson did in the aftermath, which Trump is he says he's going to overturn, is I forgot the exact name of the law, but basically it prevented, specifically I would guess priests, but religious leaders from speaking out in politics and speaking out about politics, and they would lose their 501c3 status as nonprofits. The reason why this is so important is because throughout the last, well, not now, but in those several decades, I would say from the 20s to the 60s, as organized Jewish interests started to, constrict the movement of the federal government, and it started like taking over key positions and controlling the federal government. The opposition was from Catholic leaders like Chaplin. Was his name Chaplin? I forgot his exact name, but Father Coughlin. And he had radio shows about Jews and their intrigues, etc.
Well, Kaufman's a Jewish name.
I don't know. He may have been
spelled with a K. It's a Jewish name.
No, it was Coughlin. I think is.
If it has the Kauf,
no, that's not Kaufman.
Yeah, okay. Coughlin. Okay.
Yeah, and the word spelled like cough. But he specifically, I remember, and I've heard some of those audios where he talked about organized Jewish interests and their vulture kind of parasitical destruction of the federal government and control over it, and then there was other religious leaders who specifically were speaking out against Jewish control over politics and the U.S. government. With that law that Lyndon Johnson passed, these people were no longer allowed to talk about these things, because if they did, they would lose their nonprofit status. And of course, that's a big part of when you raise funds as a church or a mosque or whoever, that's an important part of it. So you don't want to lose that 501c3 status. Trump has said that he's going to get rid of that. And with that, he said the reason why he's going to get rid of that is because he wants religious leaders to be able to hold the politicians accountable for what they're doing. And to me, nothing could be better for religious liberty. Nothing could be better for, preventing another mechanism of Jewish silence. The Jewish imposed silence of people. They do it with political correctness. They do it with cultural Marxism. They do it with their control over the media. They do it with this whole idea that we're all kooks and conspiracy theorists and things like that. So fake news is another example of how they do that. So by having priests come out and say, these Jews in government are not necessarily out to help us, and that they maybe have destructive intent, now you're waking up tens of thousands of people at once, especially Christians, because honestly, the way the Muslim world until 2001 looked at Western Europe or even America was that these were puppets of the Jews, and that they're going against their own national interest to destroy us. But now, if you open up the door for internally in these countries, the religious hierarchy and the religious leadership to openly antagonize and attack these Jewish intrigue that's happening in the government, you're now creating an opportunity for a guy like Trump to sit back and let everybody else just kind of handle the parts. And then he gets to be the wise chief of the American tribe that gets to, okay, Jews, no, nobody's going to attack you. There's no pogrom coming, but, let these people say what they want to say because this is important, So it's a very, very slick maneuver that, the way they talk about how Trump is so ignorant, why would he even know that? That's something I learned from him. I didn't even know that was the reason Johnson had put in the law. And of course, probably at the behest of Jews who told him to do this, because this is a very important thing. Now think about this, in the Ahmadiyya community, our community, we're not political, but part of the reason why individuals in the community would not say anything political is also because of the same problem that it would create, is that you would have a loss of your nonprofit status. So if you eliminate that, now Muslim leaders attacking Jewish control over the U.S. government, now Christian leaders attacking U.S. control over the government, and what are the rabbis going to do? Instead of talking about the Talmud and other things like that, they're going to start endorsing the Jewish intrigue in the government. I mean, literally, it's an opportunity for so many new voices to be heard and so many new influential voices. You see, part of this resistance is a spiritual resistance. We're opposing this on the very grounds that this is an evil, Luciferian, satanic cult. And we're seeing this with the Podesta emails and the exposure of this. And, individuals who don't believe in this stuff, I've been talking about this for well over a decade, that our politicians, large number of them, are child rapists. And they do this not necessarily as something that they were born with, this trait, but the Jews, through their think tanks, through their acronym organizations, through their skull and bones types of affiliates, they have encouraged politicians to engage in child rape. And they've told them, not just child rape, but cannibalism, drinking human blood, to tell them, hey, this is a magical thing that we're doing, and this is actually going to help you live longer and become more powerful, etc. So give us, essentially your soul, and this is the kind of benefits that can accrue to you. And that's why, of course, you'll see Jay-Z and Beyonce and LeBron James and Bruce Springsteen and so many other people come out in support of Hillary Clinton. And then you see these same people working with the Marina Abramovich spirit cooking lady who was cooking a meal for John Podesta. And, as we mentioned before, John Podesta had images of cannibalism and things like that, things that are associated with that. And then when you start investigating this, and all you got to do is go on YouTube or Google and start looking up Pizzagate, you'll find out that recently a woman who was investigating this in Haiti, where the Clintons stole billions of dollars that were there to fix the in the aftermath of the earthquake. There was a woman investigating the Clinton Foundation in Haiti specifically for the abduction of children, because in Haiti, the way they kind of raise kids is collectively as a community. So it became a big problem for them to steal these children. In Haiti, she was investigating this. Her name is Monica Peterson, and now she's dead. Another guy who was also investigating this, I don't think it was in Haiti, but also just the child rape associated with the Clintons. His name is Max Spears, I believe, Spiers. He also just recently died. And of course, we saw during the election cycle, Victor Thorne was murdered. Victor Thorne was a friend of my friend Jonathan Azaziah, who was interviewed by Victor Thorne probably earlier this year. Victor Thorne finished a book in April saying that why Hillary Clinton should not be in the White House. The least he would do is wait until after the election before committing suicide, right? To see what transpired, to see what kind of, whether or not she actually made it to the White House. Supposedly he killed himself August 1st. Seth Rich was another one who was a DNC staffer who was the likely guy who sent WikiLeaks emails about what was happening and the intrigue that was happening in the DNC to prevent Sanders from being the nominee. Another guy, John Ash, was supposed to talk about a bribery scandal. He was I think it was a UN China bribery scandal that implicated the Clintons. He was going to speak out about it, and somehow, for the first time in his weightlifting career, he had a weightlifting accident where a ton of weight fell right on his windpipe, and crushed his windpipe. And of course, you can imagine the agonizing and torturous death that ensued from that point. So the Clintons murdering people who are political opponents, goes back very, very far. This is decades and decades old. And I mean, you talk about the Rose Law Firm, you talk about a guy like Vince Foster. This is very, very deep and dark stuff. But the Pizzagate stuff is what really, I think we should go after all the Clinton supporters and tell them, hey, you're basically supporting a child rapist, child murdering psychopath. And you guys are still complaining about her not successfully stealing the election. That's another important point. So this opportunity that Trump has presented us has given us a lot more force that we can push behind the way we vocalize these subjects and how aggressive we become in helping people understand what the establishment really meant. It wasn't so much like, oh, well, here and there, Chelsea may borrow a few $1,000s from the Clinton Foundation to assist with certain things that she's doing in her personal life, and then maybe put the money back. And even if she didn't, what's the big deal? It's a few $1,000s out of $1 billion. This is much, much deeper and darker than that. And I encourage people to investigate this stuff. You can start with the Franklin cover-up. You can look into the writings of Jim Trafficant. You can also look into a thing called The Conspiracy of Silence. There's been a ton of documentaries about this. This is a global phenomenon. This is a global political phenomenon, especially in the Western nations, where these politicians are blackmailed because they have been filmed on video raping children, maybe even killing children. And as a result, it's so dark and devastating that the mainstream media will always have this access to this type of footage to prevent from any of these individuals from exposing the things that happen behind the scenes in the deep state. So anything that you would like to add on that specific angle in terms of how deep and dark and disgusting this stuff is?
No, I think that is how politicians are bribed, and maybe even like a lot of the tamer stuff. I mean, we saw how Monica Lewinsky affected the politics of Bill Clinton. I mean, and he actually outsmarted BB by actually got the tape prematurely destroyed about an interaction they had with Monica Lewinsky. But all of this started out having to do with Jonathan Pollard and the release of Jonathan Pollard. So you see from that how it is important, because Jonathan Pollard, you're talking about someone who stole state secrets and things like that. And then on the 3 days that Clinton was being indicted for perjury were the 3 biggest days that they bombed Iraq. So between December 16th and December 19th in, I believe, 1998, those were the 3 biggest days bombing of Iraq, and those were the 3 days he was giving his testimony in a perjury trial. That's not a coincidence. BB knew what he was doing, and Monica Lewinsky is essentially a Mossad agent. Brought her in.
Daughter of a rabbi, right?
I believe so, yeah. I know.
He may have been a doctor, but she may have been a granddaughter of a rabbi. Somewhere there's a rabbi there with the Monica story.
This is the classic honeypot plot.
This is how they got Mordecai Vanunu.
Absolutely. And then, they prey upon your vices. And we look in today's election, and that's essentially how Trump beat Rubio, because he sent Chris Christie in there and just bubble boy about the phone parties. Now that might seem tame compared to the child rape and all of that. I mean, if he's doing gay phone parties, but that's going to alienate his Republican base.
Let me make a point here. Muslims even now have said, "Oh, we have to prevent anti-LGBT and all this antagonism towards the gay community," which I think is a hoax, because there's really nothing happening to them other than the supposed 49 that were supposedly killed in this Islamo-fascist massacre in Orlando, which to me doesn't look real. I mean, in many different aspects.
I think the multiple shooters were the cops in that. But.
Absolutely, yeah, and there's a lot of problems with that. But what I think that people have misunderstood is that the idea of homosexuals and what they're doing and what their purpose is, you don't realize, and people don't realize, people don't realize that the gay evangelical homosexual agenda and gay behavior, adult gay behavior, almost always has some connection to child rape and some connection to child pornography or snuff films and things like that. People don't get it. People want to encourage, hey, well, you know, these orphans and they don't have fathers and they don't have mothers. Why can't we give them to a gay couple? It's been, I mean, this is not one time. There's dozens and dozens of cases spanning the entire globe where a homosexual couple, adult homosexual couple, usually a lot of times one of them is a lot older than the other one, which of course has a lot to do with it. And I think there should be some investigation, just pedophilia and homosexuality or child rape and homosexuality, because I think there's definitely a connection there. But you'll find that these people will get children from, you know, an orphanage or somewhere else, you know, go through the process, get the child, and then use the child as a prostitute for other people to come in, swingers and other types, to come in and rape the child for a fee, to pay a certain amount for it. And if you investigate this Pizzagate thing, you'll notice that a lot of the people involved are homosexuals. For example, David Brock, who is the head of Media Matters and is a Jew, who has his boyfriend, his name is, I forgot, something Elephantis, you know, who openly wears shirts that says, "I love infants." He has it on his Instagram. And you see, from an outside perspective, why are they persecuting this homosexual couple? Well, why is this homosexual couple so deeply attached to child rape and child pornography and, you know, child murder? Why is that the case? You know, and again, you'll see this. And in some books, there's been homosexuals who have written about this, that, you know, we are not just like a group that's here to celebrate our individuality and our, you know, homosexuality as like give us freedom because we're homosexuals. We are here to evangelically pursue converting more common people into our cause, in the sense that making them homosexual. And one of the best ways to do that, of course, is to get children and rape them at an age where it can create such trauma that they associate positive sexual feeling with, you know, a negative sexual experience, like the trauma of being raped. And a lot of these young kids grow up to be homosexuals and predators. So the idea that, you know, the homosexuals are just this innocuous little group and they don't really have any harm to, you know, emit or pursue, it's totally erroneous. Not only that, even in the homosexual community, they think that it's a bad thing not to have HIV. And there's documentaries made on this where they pursue HIV, they pursue getting AIDS. They call, I think it's called The Bug or something, but they look down upon you in the homosexual community if you're openly telling people that you're not HIV positive, and that even if you're not HIV positive, that you should have these, you know, orgies and things like that unprotected, so you can get HIV, so you can be part of the clique. So it's like very self-destructive as a lifestyle, and nobody's really addressing this. And if people start investigating homosexuals, aggressive evangelical homosexuals, Jewish homosexuals, you will, I guarantee you, this is just a hunch, but also there's ancillary evidence to prove this, you will find the child rapists, and you will find that amongst the homosexuals, child rape is very, very common, and also pimping these children, bringing them into your home as 2 or 3 year old kids that you adopted from somewhere, and acting like, oh, we're just the jovial homosexual couple down the street. Meanwhile, there's people going in and out of those homes raping these children. And of course, snuff films are worth tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, where not only do they rape the child, but they murder them in a very gruesome and torturous manner, and sometimes even drink the blood that's filled with adrenaline because of the fear of the child. So this is the dark stuff that's happening on a very basic level amongst politicians in not just the United States, but this is happening in Britain and happening in France and happening in even smaller European countries. And I think this is the tip of the iceberg that's going to help us destroy everything, because there's no common decent human being, no matter how liberal and how brainwashed, could ever agree that child rape is an okay thing.
And the thing about child rape is that it creates dissociation.
Yes,
to where they separate from it, and they're the only witness a lot of times. So because of this, they think that their rape is unreal, and they have a hard time associating with the rape. And because of that, and they're the only witness, they can't testify against their own protection. And the courts don't always take them seriously.
Well, what happened in the 80s, let me jump in real quick. In the 80s, this story manifested in so many different disparate locations where children were claiming that underneath the daycares, some daycares, there was underground tunnels that where they would be tortured. And if you look at Jimmy Comet, for example, Instagram, you can see that this man was associated with Obama, associated with the Pizzagate. He has a picture of a place where you can even see markings of blood, and it's like literally a place where you would kill someone. And they even call one person comments kill room, where they have murdered people. But this story actually was very prominent in the 80s, and it was called satanic ritual abuse, where these people would say they smear shit on my face and made me eat human excrement and made me eat blood.
But then that's the rise of feminism and like 79 to 83, women going to work and then putting kids in daycare. So that those two things, right? And who was behind the feminist movement? The Jews. So
and of course, there was no internet access for these kids. They didn't have iPads to say, oh, there's some other kid in some other state and city alleging the same thing. This is wonderful. Let me allege the same thing. No. But eventually, after, the authorities got involved and you saw that the corruption went into the police, went into the FBI, went into the highest levels of government, they squashed this and said all the children just made the stories up. And what's interesting now is that the same thing is now happening again. And the crazy thing is that teachers, these are a lot of times Jewish, but not just Jewish, but Jewish teachers who are involved in teaching kids that are involved in this satanic ritual child abuse. And the reason why is because now if these children, if one or two of them decide to get together at 5, 6, 7 years old after the trauma has set in and say, we need to tell the authorities, just like they did in the 80s where they told the police, when they started investigating, a handful of them were like, man, maybe these kids are telling the truth. But they always received that pushback, and then the agenda and the story eventually became, oh, well, it's just the kids making up stories and there's nothing else. But later on, they investigated to see, hey, let me look under these daycares. When daycares were abandoned or they were shut down, they looked to see, and there were tunnels underneath these daycares, large scale tunnels with all types of labyrinthine kind of mazes where they would, have these different rooms. We don't know what took place there, but that evidence in and of itself for the kids.
One of the unproven theories that people have about Walt Disney and Disney World is that the tunnels underneath, and he used those to abuse. I don't believe that, but it's
been stated. And now what they're saying is here in DC, because this whole thing right now is centered in DC. Now, we should not believe that this is the epicenter or the only place where this takes place. No, this happens everywhere, but this specific scandal, because of the politicians and they're always in DC, it had to be centered in DC as it relates to these politicians. But of course, with the Franklin cover-up, I think that was Nebraska. There's so many different places where these types of things have transpired. But even now, the allegation is the same, that there are these underground tunnels, and if you look at the Jimmy Comet Instagram, he shows where a construction company who's right next door as a business has come into his business and split open the ground and is creating underground tunnels. And he literally put it up on his Instagram. You're sitting there wondering, why does a pizza shop need to dig underneath its foundation? To do what?
And a lot of this is enabled by the fact that people think that the courts and the police are going to protect us from all of this. And
they're involved.
Oh, absolutely, they're involved. And in fact, I would say that the legal industry, they have a sexual abuse industry. It's an industry.
Yeah.
You get that in you have a divorce because a father abused a child. And then now the child the mother wants to protect the father from abusing the child. So then they have to bring in a third lawyer. Whenever they have this, they have 3 lawyers, one for the child, one for so now you're employing 3 lawyers.
The lawyers are involved.
Right. They are involved.
The lawyers are supposedly there to protect the child. They'll be part of organ trafficking investigation groups, and they're the ones doing it.
Right.
They're the ones, actually involved. And that's how deep the rabbit hole goes, is you would think, these guys, you would run to them. You would say, hey, I need an attorney because I have a dozen children who are alleging that excuse me, that they have been raped by, let's say, Bill Clinton or even Obama or whoever. And now you would run to the lawyer, and the lawyer would be like, oh, okay, cool, let me take care of this from here. And then the lawyer is going to create havoc for you as an individual. He's going to destroy the whole premise of the investigation. He will even convince the children.
While they're collecting retainers.
Right. While they make the money off of it,
yeah.
And they completely eradicate the whole thing. That's why you need a complete and total revolution in terms of all of these things, how they're investigated, finding the right judges to put to have in power, having the right prosecutors who are not going to be browbeaten, who are not going to be scared, who are not going to be bought out, and then maybe you can get some of these criminals. But this is such an entrenched practice, and it's been going on for, I would argue, hundreds of years.
Oh, absolutely.
That it's going to be very difficult to pull these people out, and this is the one thing they will kill you over.
Right.
As even us here in this, we're putting our face on this. They will kill you over. They just killed Monica Peterson. They just killed Max Spears. Gary Caradori, who I've mentioned in a different podcast on a different show, was an individual who came to Chicago to collect evidence specifically about children claiming they were being raped in 1994, I believe. And he called his friend and said, "Hey, I'm coming back. I got all the photographs. I got everything that we're going to need to get these guys, and we're going to get them this time." Called on a payphone, has his own private jet, goes in the air. Private jet is destroyed on the way to wherever he was coming back to, and then his son was there with him, was also killed, and all the pictures and everything else that he claimed that he had were missing from the scene.
But the other rhetorical question I have on this is, and it's on the police end, and I know the answer to it, but is, okay, how many times do people get pulled over for suspicion? Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't have a car, and I walk home at night, in the middle of the night, and if I'm after midnight, I'm going to have 4 cops pull me over, walking on the streets of Naperville. And how they can pull me over for suspicion. Now, if you have like a mother who thinks that for some reason the father or anybody in the family or someone else is sexually abusing their child, why isn't that grounds for suspicion? And help use that to protect the child. And that's how you know the police are in on this, because suspicion never works for us. It always works against us. So that is how you know police are against you, and you know that the lawyers are against. Lawyers have like a DUI industry. You can name industry after industry after industry. That's all they are. It's an industry. They prey upon your suffering. Mm-hmm. That's what they are. They're the parasitic middleman of the society. They do no good to our society. They create a language, and they get to do this language because they go in like rats and infiltrate the political system. So they create the laws, and they make the laws so complicated that they're the only one that can understand this language. Yeah. So they create the need for themselves. Mm-hmm. And then that is how the legal industry stays in business, by making everything complicated and they're the only ones that can figure out this language, that they're the only one that can speak.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And I mean, doctors do a similar thing too. And we have to get rid of the parasitic middleman within our society, and the producers have to take over. Because the producers are the vital industry.
And more people need to start being producers instead of being slaves, instead of being working, automaton type of jobs where they don't use their brain. Mm-hmm. And then they're so tired after an 8-hour shift that they don't want to use their brain after work either. Mm-hmm. Because it's very difficult, and so not only do you not use your brain as part of your occupation, but you're also not using your brain afterwards to investigate the Pizzagate scandal, for example, that I think individuals need to take more control over their lives. We've never had so much access to so many different ways to make money. So I think that individuals should not, look at themselves as powerless in the face of this because they don't have money, that you can make money off just about anything, and especially minorities who believe that there's some type of glass ceiling or that the white people control everything at the top. It's totally nonsense. You have young kids as young as 12, 13 years old in the hood, black kids who are making tens of thousands of dollars a month just off YouTube or different ways that they, because now you have a global marketplace for everything. And of course, this free enterprise model of America is what the Jews hate the most about this country. It allows any individual to become completely and totally free and independent, and also live a very wealthy life, and do it in a way where you don't have to be a drug dealer or you don't have to be a child rapist to make all this money. You can actually make a lot of money just, filling a need. And what they've tried to do is make us all seem like we're all collectives. We're all the blacks, or we're all the 99% or whatever, cute buzzword they use to try to huddle us together. And, impose a communist kind of paradigm, whereas all of us have individual capacities to do wonderful things in and of ourselves, but we are trained from a young age to never trust our instincts and our abilities and our natural aptitudes, and instead sell out and say we need a job in order to pay for the student loans, where we learn basically entirely useless things, especially in the liberal arts, for example, where it's a bunch of lies that you've learned and they're not even worthy of anything, so you can't even really get a job peddling that information anyway. Unless you're become a PhD and then a professor, and then you make 45, 50, maybe $60,000 a year. Maybe you wrote a book or two, but at the end of the day, you still had like $80,000 to $100,000 in student loan debt, just off the top. So this, what I think Trump is trying to do, and I can't speak for him, and we're gonna ultimately see, but one of the things that I think him and Steve Bannon would try to do is to allow more people to take in that genuine American dream, the idea of being an individual here, learning what you learn, and then applying it in a way to solve a solution for other people, and make a lot of money as a producer of such a thing, or a new technology or whatever. So they've tried to eradicate this notion, the idea that we can do this, and they want to impose this concept that we need a handout from the government, or that poor people absolutely have to have this handout, otherwise they're just going to be destroyed, and this is the evil people in charge. So they've essentially created class warfare under identity politics, and many people have alluded to this, because it doesn't make sense for us to be all at each other's throats when we're all pretty much in the same category, and the 0.1 or 0.01% are the ones extracting all of the wealth. So our beef is not with a normal white person who's making a very small, barely livable wage. Our problem is with the oligarchs and the plutocrats and everyone else that's behind the scenes making all the money, and literally making the money off the backs of the rest of us through policies and through taxation and through all these different mechanisms that they have, where they just sit back and they convince you that they have your best interests at heart, which is give you a little bit of their shekels off the top, and then you put them in power where they make millions and billions of dollars. And then they get so powerful that you can't even take them out of those positions. And meanwhile, we have literally slaves right now. They are literal slaves almost, advocating for their further slavery by being angry and upset at Donald Trump, and not recognizing that Clinton was their slave master, and Clinton was the harbinger of extreme destruction, the one who would take away their ability to do anything in a free market society again, by endless regulations. I didn't mention this, but me and my father, we were looking at, me specifically, into hemp, because I assumed that with the wave of, legalization of marijuana and things like that, this long-term ban on hemp, of growing hemp in America, which is totally irrational, would be lifted very soon. And so Kentucky is one of the few places where we could grow this. So I was talking to my father about, hey, let's try to grow some hemp in Kentucky with our, we have land, and let's, take advantage of that. The land is just sitting there. We're being taxed every year. Let's take advantage of the land and get in the process of cultivating hemp. And then within a year or two, when it's legalized, we would have already have our setup. So we would be able to be a supplier of hemp for, processors, or even process it ourselves and, extract wealth from our own land. When we started that process, it became so clear right away that the regulations there and the preventative measures to prevent common people from taking advantage of such a program were so vast that even the lexicon, even the way that they asked us to give the description of the land that we were going to use and who were we going to go for a supplier, all these things is something you would figure out after you had started cultivating hemp. But instead, they made it where you had to do it prior, and it was basically impossible. And we missed the deadline by a technicality because the map was not drawn the exact way they wanted it. So it prevents all of these things, and these regulations are coming, and they keep coming, and they keep coming, and they're just there to allow the vultures to prey on society. And the vultures are all plugged into a system where they understand who the authority is, whereas all the common people can't take advantage of all of these new methods where they could gain freedom and gain wealth, where they would have independence, like a Donald Trump, to be able to go in and basically have an insurrection or a coup against this deep state establishment, So they don't want to. They want Trump to be the last person that ever accomplished such a task, and it was a gargantuan task for him to accomplish. So, and what I think he wants to do is eliminate all those barriers to allow more people like him to rise through the ranks and help the society remain free. So when people talk about these things, they don't recognize that the people that they would want to put in power are the people who are enslaving them, the people who are causing them this disease of liberalism, which is a total mental disease, because these people cannot argue with you. They cannot sit down and have a discussion now with this progressive, paradigm where everything is racism, everything is sexism, everything is some type of ism that precludes you from discussing openly a subject because you are now tainted by some ideology that's been imposed upon you or that you're labeled with, and that now you can't have an open and frank discussion with anyone on these subjects, which prevents the exposure of things like Pizzagate. I was telling people that this was happening, decades ago, because I was researching, but people would never listen. They don't want to hear this stuff. They don't want to think that the politician who they took a picture with, who smiled, who made them feel like they were a unique person, because this is what they do. They know how to be charming. They know how to be charismatic. Bill Clinton is famous for that. The ability of making one individual feel like they're on top of the world for just a brief moment when you interact with them. Obama's obviously clearly good at this. So they don't want to think that these people who are so nice to them or so accommodating to them are really engaged in such sick, destructive, demonic things. And it's too much of a shock to their system, because then now you have to look at 9/11 again. Now you have to look at the history of America again. Now you have to look at who's in power again. Now you have to look at every Jew with power with a raised eyebrow. Like, what is he doing there? And they're not comfortable and ready to do that. So what, to me, this thing allows us now is to really hammer these points home. I mean, with the WikiLeaks and these emails, we have so much exposure. There's thousands and thousands of emails to look through. And, luckily we have a group of people that is doing this. One of the emails that came out about Clinton was the Rothschild, an email to Lynn DeForester Rothschild, where she said, in context, it was something that apparently went wrong that the Rothschilds wanted, and she either failed or didn't, do the right thing. She was like, "What penance do I owe you?" To a woman who is a civilian, arguably. When they tell us, when we talk about the Rothschilds, they say we're conspiracy theorists, etc., we're anti-Jew bigots. Why is the woman who is so powerful, who is about to ascend to the throne, telling a woman like Linda Forrester Rothschild, "What penance do I owe you?" That's literally a slave asking for mercy from its master. And it's unbelievable that this is a civilian. Nobody has any questions about this. Nobody is like, this person has precluded themselves from being at the highest office in the land because you're a slave to all these other groups. You're a slave to Qatar, Saudi Arabia, all these other groups, the banks.
Do we question the Jews having to be taken into Palestine based upon a letter that said, "Dear Lord Rothschild"? I mean, from 99 years ago?
Right.
So,
why would anything have changed? What great tumultuous upheaval occurred in the world to say that this paradigm that was already established in the early 1900s just somehow is no longer the case? Did the Rothschilds stop controlling all central banks? Did Jewish power wane? No. Has there been a massive pogrom other than the fake Holocaust that they keep talking about? No. So why wouldn't their power be even more concentrated?
But what they made their power and what accelerated their power was the Industrial Revolution. Because when you were a farmer, you were pretty much an independent contractor. You grew your own food. Your own food came off the sweat of your own back.
That's right.
And you were a producer, and you didn't need the parasitic middleman.
That's right.
And you only needed the parasitic middleman when the Jewish bankers came to you and said, "You know what, if you buy some tractors and buy some like this and this and this, we can grow more crops, and then you can sell these crops at our stores, and then you can..." And then before long, he has all this usury interest that he's got to pay for. And then before long, the banks are controlling what he grows, and the banks are controlling what he doesn't grow. And then he has to rely on the fund. And then when he goes down, then he's got to pay for the state. And then like the Marxist state comes after him. And before long, you've Marxified agriculture. And the reason why the farmer didn't stop getting represented was because of the Industrial Revolution, to where now more people were working in manufacturing jobs, and you created like the suburbs and the big cities, and the farmers became the minority within a community. And you look at that, like here in the state of Illinois, it's at an extreme level because the city of Chicago, population-wise, just totally dwarfs the agriculture of Illinois. But if you look at the space of Illinois, that agriculture takes up most of Illinois. Mm-hmm. And this is why you need the Electoral College, because this part of it needs to be represented, because you have all this population where it's in the big cities, and the big cities aren't going to have agricultural needs. So because of that, you can now screw the farmer over through democracy. And that has happened. And the farmer does not get represented. That's why I've proposed redrawing state lines and creating like an agricultural superstate to where the needs of the agriculture gets represented. Because one of the things that created Marxism was workers of the world unite. That was not farmers saying that. Yeah. That was manufacturing. And who owned most of the textile mills? The Rothschilds owned those directly. Where now the reason why slavery lasted in the United States as long as it did was because the Rothschilds were supplementing the plantations, like the cotton plantations, directly through the Knights of the Golden Circle of a small number of plantations. Because once there was an influx of immigrant labor, slavery made no sense in the United States. If you're a plantation owner, why would you have this slave that you have to house and you have to take care of and he can't go away? When I have this immigrant who has his own house, has his own food, buys everything himself, and he's going to work, and he's probably, I have to beat this guy and force him to work, and this guy is hungry and wants to work because he wants to beat this other immigrant out for a job. So from that context, slavery made no sense, other than the fact that it was supplemented by Rothschild textile mills. And later on, that would create the alibi for the Civil War. When it had nothing to do with it, it had to do, the Civil War in its basic essence was agriculture states versus manufacturing states. And the difference in the dynamics of those two states. And they worked together and created a paradigm there because the farmers in the South wanted to sell their like cotton to Europe. And they wanted to sell it. They could sell it with a lot lower taxes and they could sell it for a lot more money than they were getting from the northern manufacturing mills. So why wouldn't they do that? Except the fact that now that they were going to impose tariffs that specifically targeted the agriculture of the South. Now, I don't have a problem with tariffs, trade tariffs in that sense, but specifically the agriculture was getting heavily tariffed, and it was because with the Industrial Revolution you were not getting proper representation of agriculture. So over this 50-year span that you created the Industrial Revolution, the farmer was progressively getting more screwed because he was not getting properly represented in his needs. And you see that today. And it is why you need the Electoral College, because otherwise, Mexifornia is going to rule the United States. New York's going to rule the United States. Florida is going to rule the United States. Even Chicago is going to rule the United States, like it holds Illinois hostage. And so it's no coincidence that there was a coordination of Rothschildism, the Civil War, the Industrial Revolution, and both the one in Europe and the one in the United States, and it all worked together. Mm-hmm. And Thomas Jefferson has many different quotes where he said that for the United States to be sustainable, it has to remain an agricultural nation. And he was right on with that. Because the basic dynamics of the United States and what keeps its freedom and what keeps it the way it is And the way it prevents it from having the trappings of Europe, like it had in Holland and you had in England, and the reason a lot of them came here has to do with the way Europe was getting progressively more industrial. So to come over here, and our forefathers were primarily agricultural minded. They were an agrarian people. And most of the people who brought in the Federalist movement were not farmers. John Adams was a lawyer. Alexander Hamilton was not a farmer. It's like, I think he had a farm, but I don't think he had the farmer mentality. But Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, these guys had farmers. Now, a lot of people want to impose the slave thing on them, but the farmers' need had to be represented. So what was the big thing you could hang on the farmer? Oh, they were slave owners. But why would someone who has a textile mill need slaves? Oh, yeah, but you just have people working for 2 cents a day, Mm-hmm. They're not slaves, but they work a hell of a lot cheaper. So had the Industrial Revolution not happened, it would not have accelerated the Jewish cause and the Rothschild cause.
Right, because they control the mechanisms of production and everything else, and they are the ultimate middlemen, so they just take your produce. I mean, look what they did in the Holodomor, right? The Holodomor, where they essentially murdered, by starvation, I would say anywhere from 20 to 40 million Orthodox Christians in the Ukraine. That's how they did it. They were producers, and then they said, "Nope, this is all ours. This is all going to the central government, and you will get your rations as needed." And so, if they even hid a little bit of their, produce for themselves, they were executed. And this is how you create massive scale, murder. Because they took over the means of production. They took over all of these farmers. They were expected to produce, and then everything was taken from them. Not even enough to survive on was given to them. And all of this wealth, all of this food wealth was just hoarded. Just as they do with wealth and money wealth, they hoard it, and people are starving, and they want more and more to hold on to. They're not doing anything with it other than holding on to it and extracting it and pulling it out. So, if you look at the Rothschilds, whatever's after a trillion, whatever that quadrillion, there were probably tens of quadrillions, because if you look at our economy globally, just the digital economy is 56 trillion. It's probably going to be close to 100 by the time Trump gets in office and hopefully makes a change. That's a lot of money, but they're the ones at the very center of all the central banks. So they are the ones who constantly pull that wealth in, and they need these wars to enslave these governments further and also extract more wealth, and that gives them more and more power. So it's like, oh, you're in opposition to us, and you don't like raping kids, and you don't like doing this. Well, would you take $1 billion? Would you take a certain number, 100 million? They have the ability to give you whatever you want. So are you going to be that one lone soldier that's going to fight the entire, millennia-long Jewish conspiracy, or are you just going to be another one of those people who pretends to do so and actually does not? And, it's not just in this type of discourse, podcasts and writers and stuff like that. This goes even to music. There's fake revolutionary hip-hop artists who will not talk about, like, for example, Immortal Technique. He will not talk about Jews. He talks about them in a very glowing light. He's almost a sycophant of Jews. The leader of his record label is a Jew who had Broadway plays where, it was nude Broadway plays. That's his claim to fame. And this guy supposedly is the most revolutionary hip-hop artist, and everyone thinks he's there to save them. Meanwhile, when they asked him about Palestine in 2014, when, Operation, I think it was Protective Edge is what they called it, was in full swing, the first thing out of his mouth was European anti-Semitism. What in the hell does that have to do with, Gaza and their right to resist, and the essential, every 2 or 3 years they have a genocide, and where they call it mowing the lawn, where they go in and kill thousands of Gazan civilians, specifically women and children. The first thing out of this devil's mouth was European anti-Semitism caused a lot of problems. They're asking him about Palestine. This is what he says. So everywhere you go, the people who are supposedly revolutionary, the people who are supposedly fighting the good cause, they're not. They are just giving you the words colonialism, imperialism, white supremacy, racism, classism, class warfare, or, globalist tyranny, or all of these nebulous phrases that prevent you from attacking the root source of this, which is the banking system, which are, in total control by, Talmudic bankers. The Rothschilds were a Talmudic clan. They weren't just simply, oh, we're just Jews and, when it's convenient. No, these people believe in the Talmud. This is a book, you can get a book by Amos Alone about the Rothschilds, where, this is very much known. Or even, anti-Jew, Jew supremacist Gilad Atzmon talks about the clever eugenics of the rabbis intermixing with the bankers. So the rabbis would have a Talmud student go and marry the daughter of a banking dynasty, so they could bring these two things together. And this is all still happening. And the idea that, now we have to allow Jews. My idea and my suggestion to all Gentiles who want to resist this communist, Judaic totalitarianism globally is to create broad-based coalitions that exclude only Jews. Only Jews should be the ones not allowed. If you suspect someone of being Jewish, they should not be allowed. Just like, Malcolm early on in the Nation of Islam later on suggested that white people don't need to be in our groups in order to help us. If you want to help us, go out to your, white brethren and have them stop oppressing us. You don't need to be in my group in order to help us. This is a black group and this is what we're doing. Similarly, Gentiles should create Gentile Unity organizations where Jews are simply not allowed. Then if you have a Gentile who's got a Jew behind the scenes working with him and helping him, then you'll be able to isolate them a little bit easier. But if you include Jews, they're eventually going to take over with money, because that's what they do. I hear from a lot of black people, so what that George Soros is financing Black Lives Matter? Black Lives Matter is a good group, so what's the problem with having DeRay McKesson, who's one of the major leaders, living in a home that Soros owns? So what? It's not a big deal. Or so what that George Soros has put $150 million available for Black Lives Matter globally, so they can stand in front of planes before they take off, or stand in front of a highway where they don't accomplish anything. Why? What's the problem with that? And it's like, the problem is, why would this billionaire Jew help you? He's not helping you. He's using you and your emotions and your history and the legacy of slavery and the legacy of your oppression to wield as a battering ram against the society, the dominant players in society, like quote unquote white people. You think white people are so powerful? Why are they allowing this man to come in and terrorize them? Why is it the mainstream media doesn't show black on white violence as black on white violence, whereas they create the racial context for everything else? So these are not things that are assisting you. They're not helping you. And by you claiming white supremacy is the problem, it doesn't solve the problem. Let's say white supremacy is really the problem, right? How does you openly talking about it say anything about that? Or how does a rapper saying that I'm going to put I got a chopper in the trunk for Donald Trump, meaning I'm going to kill Donald Trump. If he's saying that, what kind of white supremacist society would even allow a black rapper to just go out of his way to attack the white nationalist president of the United States? It's totally erroneous. It's totally ridiculous. And all you have to do is take your emotions out of it and start to realize, hey, from a logical level, from a rational perspective, from a justice perspective, where are we at in this game? The NAACP was created by Jews. A lot of other black resistance groups, and the ones that were not, like the UNIA of Marcus Garvey, they were destroyed. Marcus Garvey was sent out of here, and they started going after him for taxes. You think they're going to go after someone who works with Soros for taxes? Absolutely not. So by tacitly aligning yourself with them in the idea that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, it's actually how more destructive things happen. Because Soros is not going to be there helping you and training you when the race war breaks out. If you have the race war break out, the white people in America, for the most part, relatively speaking, are far more trained on weaponry and shooting and militias. They will destroy you. Your youth that are out there killing each other are killing each other and doing it on accident. They're not even aiming properly. They're killing children because they can't even aim. They've never been trained in weapons, So this idea that you're just going to start this race war at the behest of George Soros, he's going to pull back, just like the United States pulled back from the Kurds. Oh yeah, go get Saddam. And then it's like, oh, Saddam's really going to go after these people. You know what? Forget it. And they let the Kurds get wiped out, and they don't realize that this is what happens when you're a bedfellow with the Jews. All these Muslims that are falling for this liberal Jewish paradigm that they were all one, and it's blacks and Muslims and Jews, and we're all like together, and we got to stop the evil white man. And all these Muslims are buying into this narrative. They don't realize that you're going to be the battering ram, and then when white supremacy, if it really even exists, and comes after you, they're going to back up, and your support is going to be gone. And those white people and those Jews that you thought were helpful, they're going to become white again. They're going to slither away and be like, you're on your own, buddy. And that's the problem. We are all on our own in a sense. And that's why we have to unite, and we have to prevent Jews from taking over. And anytime any money is talked about, I know that we all need money. I mean, this costs money. A lot of things cost money, and time as well. But that doesn't mean that, you take the money from the wrong source. You have to do what Trump did, for example, where you take tiny, small donations from individuals as opposed to taking one massive donation from some, liberal Jewish group that obviously has an ulterior agenda. They're obviously going to want to put a board member on your group. For example, in Chicago, we have a group called the Inner City Muslim Action Network, IMAN or Iman. And even them, they have a Jew on the board. And a few years ago, I was wondering why they wouldn't bring me on to do my music and things like that. When I had 50 people email them, they said, "Hey, anyone from the local community who wants to be part of this show and wants to perform, plug in your music and let us know. And then hopefully, if you have people that are fans, they should promote you, and they should tell us that they want you." 50 people emailed them, and they didn't even respond. And the people they selected didn't have any assistance or help or any support at all. And you would wonder, why did that happen? Well, all you got to do is run a quick search for Converse on the internet, and you'll find out why you won't, because Converse is attached at the hip with all the anti-Jewish, the revolution that's kind of happening. So, the idea that you can take money from these people and use them to get a leg up and then eventually, not work with their agenda is totally false. It's totally erroneous, and you will cause yourself more problems, more destruction. This whole civil rights era and the idea that the Democrats are the savior party for minorities is totally nonsense. It's actually made minorities less stable in the United States. It's made a legitimate antagonism come from white America, because they're looking at them like a bunch of whiny, perpetually victimized class. And they don't, respect you anymore, because you're not standing on your own 2 feet and saying, hey, we're going to pursue our own agenda. They would have no problem with that. It's that you're using the Jews and everyone else to come assist you at fighting this nebulous non-existent enemy. And of course people are going to have a reaction. People are talking about, I think Van Jones was on CNN calling this election a white lash. I'm not white. You know what I mean? There's so many black supporters of Trump. They're not white. So many Hispanic supporters. They're not white. And the idea that it's a racial thing, those same white people voted for Obama the last 2 election cycles. So they saw that Obama was bringing in Judaic communism. So they maybe stepped back and said, hey, maybe this is not for us. One of the reasons why immigrants come to the United States is for opportunity, not to get handouts. Maybe now with the Mexican illegals, but for the most part, nobody was anticipating that America is just going to write you a check and you get to just sit here on your ass. The whole concept of America was like, my natural talents, my natural aptitudes, my natural abilities will have the greatest potential for accomplishing something for me, and I'll have the greatest ability to turn that potential into something tangible over time in America as opposed to anywhere else. And you look at the slide that we're on, Europe, they took away their guns. Now they don't have free speech. Canada, in a large way. Now, when I say took away their guns, there's still ways to get guns, but it's very, very difficult. It's an arduous process. Same thing with Canada. Took away your guns, took away free speech. Same thing they were trying to do here. And who's leading the cause of gun control? Jews. Why? Because they don't want you to talk. Because the talking is really the problem. The free speech, the idea of us expressing ourselves. And to me, the greatest victory that Trump brought us is the ability for us to now be able to communicate about any subject that we want to talk about and really drive these points home, because within the next 4 years, who knows what kind of intrigues they'll have waiting for us. But if we radically alter the consciousness of these people, of these liberals who are clearly insane, some of them, we can try to slowly bring them back away from the edge and say, hey, look, this is why we were on this side. This is why a hardcore brown Muslim revolutionary like myself, who is very proud of all of my identities, is on this side of things. It's not like I just woke up one day and decided to become a white supremacist. I mean, it's a ridiculous notion. So anything else you want to add on this subject?
Well, during the 60s, there was a movement, many different movements that basically flooded Democrats into the Republican Party. Most common one was the neoconservative movement, where you had Trotskyite Democrats who would go in and take over the Republican Party, and then they would become the warmongers for Israel. You had the Dixiecrat movement. McCarthyism drove many Democrats into the Republican Party, because that was the great way to get around being labeled a communist, was just go join the Republican Party. So you had this flood of Democrats post-World War II just going into and taking over the Republican Party, to the point where the Republican Party had no identity. Before, it was a paleo-conservative party. It was created in 1852 to actually as an abolitionist party. And it was known as the party for the black people. And many of the best Republican presidents all came from the state of Ohio. You had President Taft, who is from the state of Ohio. You had Warren Harding, who was and these are very good presidents. They were very fiscally conservative. McKinley, who was assassinated to make way for Teddy Roosevelt, who had very much Marxist ideology. He was from Ohio. Garfield, who was assassinated like 88 days into his presidency, he was from Ohio. So you had this Ohio dynasty within the Republic, but they all had that same paleo, Pat Buchanan type nationalist mentality. So when you had all this flooding of Democrats going in and taking over the Republican Party, now wouldn't you think that would hurt the Democratic Party? It actually didn't, because now with the civil rights movement, you had all these new you had all these minorities voting Democrat. So that filled in the gap and actually kept the paradigm alive. So what you actually did was kill off the Republican Party and created two Marxist parties. And that's what the civil rights movement actually did, was it just helped fill in the gap for all the people who left the Democratic Party to join the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. So when people need to understand that, because then they see the tie between the civil rights movement and neoconservatism. But we don't, because we see left and we see right. And we're not seeing that there was a Jewish agenda behind all of this. Mm-hmm. Because the neoconservative, many of them left under the alibi that the Republican Party wasn't doing enough for Israel, or the Democratic Party wasn't doing enough for Israel. So they went and joined the Republican Party. And then, you have to look at things with that abstract way of seeing things, and otherwise you're not going to see it. It's like, how did all of these? How did the Republican Party become so liberal? And then, the libertarians like to talk about how, it's the party and the government and all of this. Well, that's the reason why. It's because these two things were working together. Yeah, you ruined your good party and you flooded it to where it became pragmatism. It became pragmatism by paradigm. It's a crazy concept, but it is. It's pragmatism by paradigm. You create two lies and then get people to fight over which one is correct. And then you become pragmatic about everything and you accomplish nothing. Mm-hmm. I mean, the greatest way to accomplish nothing politically is become pragmatic. Just don't stand for anything. And then because of that, it makes everybody lukewarm politically. And then you kill off nationalism because nobody has any passion for anything. It's important to stand on principles. We don't have principles. We don't have an ideology. What does it mean to be American anymore? And that's why you can't have nationalism in the United States.
What's funny is that these people who want to have such a huge say in the direction America takes are saying, when was America ever great? Right? And Clinton is supporting this. So you would sit there and be like, wait a second, you're running for the office of President of the United States, but essentially you're saying that this place has never been great because it's so oppressive to all these people. I mean, how ridiculous is that? How ridiculous is it to have an anti-nationalist as the leader of your country? It makes no sense. Why would you even want that? Why would you sit there and then why are you believing in the democratic principles and all of these things and going out and voting and going out and telling people to vote? You know, if you really think that this place doesn't have the freedom that it claims to have or all these other things, then what are you doing engaging with the process? You see, and I think a lot of liberals and Democrats, hopefully if at least one of them tunes in today, you should go watch a documentary by Dinesh D'Souza, who, you know, I disagree with on a lot of different subjects, but he made a couple really nice documentaries. One of them was about Obama's America. I think he did this in 2012. And I believe earlier this year he made one called Hillary's America in 2016. So you can look this up. And what you will learn is the history of the Democratic Party, how they were the party of slavery, how they were the party of racism. And to a large degree, if you want to look at it from the tangible effect that they've had on these communities, where you have black Democratic leadership or Democratic leadership for decades in the most failing places in the United States, like Detroit, like Baltimore, like a lot of different places, like Chicago even, you know, when you consider the south side of Chicago, the corruption in the city, and then you also consider the genocide or even the fratricide in the south side of Chicago. All of these places have Democratic leadership. So you wonder, why is it that the culprit remains to be white supremacy when white people have not only left, but they're not even involved in your political process? And what you have to wonder is, are these sellouts who represent the race, maybe black people or Hispanics or whoever, are they really just figureheads? And they're there to establish the normalcy of, you know, having dysfunctional cities and having dysfunctional societies where they're sitting on top of this destroyed, dilapidated infrastructure, and they think that, you know, they're doing a good thing. And then whenever they're accused of, say, embezzlement or corruption or whatever, they just blame it and pass the buck and say it's the white man. And it's this nebulous white man because there's white people suffering under this paradigm as anyone else. So it's very dishonest when you look at it from that perspective, that you don't understand that, you know, when people talk to me, they'll be like, wait, you're not a Democrat? As if it's like some type of mandated thing from birth that anyone with a little bit of pigment in their skin is supposed to be a Democrat. It's totally ridiculous. It's patently ridiculous. And then they browbeat you with this notion that they've just developed all on their own. I mean, or you know, have been given some propaganda to make them believe it, but they don't have any evidence as to why this should be the case. You know, and what happens is, you will notice the more independent-minded people, the more people who think for themselves, they're starting to gravitate toward the Republican Party, even though, to me, both of the parties were totally corrupt and useless to me until the phenomenon of Trump. Before Trump, all of these people were, you know, both right and left were useless. And, you know, when we looked at it, we would assume Fox News was the worst, you know, of the propagandist outlets. And under this election cycle, despite the fact that there was an insurrection and a mutiny or, you know, some type of weird sexual abuse scandal, which seems to happen everywhere nowadays, it still took place in Fox News. Despite that fact, there was still a little bit of knowledge and newsworthy items that you could gain.
I think Fox News is one of the least dangerous, and the reason why, anybody with half a brain in their head looks at it like the National Enquirer. Like, you don't take it seriously. And the only people who really take it seriously are these hardcore rednecks who can be manipulated anyway. Yeah. The scary thing is like a CNN or an MSNBC, because the pseudo-intellectual takes it so seriously, and that's what makes it scary, is because it appeals to a certain people who think that they are smarter than they really are. And people, like, I love watching Fox News because I look at it like reading the Enquirer. It's so over the top. I mean, like, you watch like a Sean Hannity or a Bill O'Reilly. I mean, sometimes they piss me off, but it's like, don't,
theater.
I can never take it seriously. It's way too over the top. Whereas I think that Wolf Blitzer, when he's up there, he really is trying to be sincere, or he's like an actor trying to be sincere. It's like, that's when it is scary. The thing that people will take seriously. But even like a typical college student or something, they don't take Fox News seriously. I don't think. Like when I talk to people in in conversations. But one thing I will point out is you can figure it all out just in the names Democrat and Republican. Because Democrat, what is democracy? The majority of the people. So why are the minorities flocking to a mentality that is about the majority of the people? Whereas the Republican, is the overseeing of an aristocracy to enforce human rights of people and constitutional rights.
Well, the answer to that question is probably rooted in the fact that the minorities are now becoming the majority.
Well, only because they banded together and because
of the incredible influx of illegal immigrants who are now able to vote, and because the 1965's immigration legislation that allowed so much more immigration from so many other countries that were previously kind of, they were restricted. So the demographics have shifted so tremendously that now they're just creating a fake conglomerate or a fake coalition of all of these minorities who none of their needs are being represented. It's as if like homosexuals and Muslims just agree on everything. It's pretty crazy, but that's a very important point that people don't know. People don't know the history of the Democratic and Republican Party or this country or what it stands for. The idea that it's unconstitutional to prevent immigration from certain countries. How is that unconstitutional? And I've never heard an explanation. I've heard lawyers in my community claim that the Constitution protects the right of non-Americans to come here, from anywhere, and not be restricted by anything, whether ideology or otherwise. That's not the case.
But are these same people attacking Obama over Honduras refugees being kicked out?
Yeah.
Or when in 1979, when Jimmy Carter was kicking Iranians out of the United States.
Or even Obama in 2000, I forgot, was it 8 or 9? 9 or 10 maybe, where he was kicking out Iraqis because he was worried about who they were and where they're coming from and their ideologies.
Right.
See, it's just literally ideological tyranny. It's basically like, this is what we believe, and this is obviously true. And if you don't agree, well, there's no talking to you because you're basically a madman.
The new Marxist definition of tolerance is agreement with a liberal. I mean, that's essentially it.
Yeah.
You're tolerant.
Tolerance is essentially intolerance. It's literally Orwellian because they don't want to communicate with you. They don't want to argue with you. I've had people who attack me, but then they don't realize that I know what I'm talking about. So the moment I open my mouth, they run. They run rapidly in the opposite direction because they thought, oh, I'm just going to browbeat this person and shame them. That's another thing. This concept of shaming someone. You're such and such. You're such and such. And you just give you a label, and then you're like, you're supposed to be like, no, but actually I'm not. I'm not racist. I love black people. I have a lot of black friends. No. How about you go on the offensive and tell that person what they are? Someone who supports child rape. Someone who supports, a banking structure that's just very destructive to the entire planet. Someone who, endorses taking over the sovereignty of a nation like Syria. Someone who endorses an African leader or an African American leader in America destroying the most independent African country like Libya, where they're actually trying to bring the entire continent together, with Gaddafi. So everything that they say can be destroyed, but it's just about manner of getting educated about these subjects. I feel like one of the things that we miss out on is that we don't have our educational system, which I think seems like hopefully Trump is going to also make major changes to. It lies to you all the time from a young age, so you don't know what to believe. There's black kids in the hood who are probably among the most oppressed people in the United States, if not the most, who are from a young age they're told that the Holocaust was the most destructive and horrible thing that ever happened in human history. So they have a natural affinity to Jews, as if the Jews are some persecuted other, just like the black people. And in fact, it was the Jews who persecuted the black people the most. If you look at slumlords, one of the ways I got banned one time on Facebook was because somebody put up an article about slumlords in Chicago, and it was 2 Orthodox Jews. And so I was like, of course it would be Jews who are the greatest slumlords. That's all I said, and I got banned on Facebook for I think 3 days because of it. So these are the types of things that are not allowed. You can't talk about that. So you can say anything. The whole point of the whole racism discussion is so funny to me, is that you'll say white, 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 white. But then if a white person said black or yellow or Muslim or whatever, that's like racism. But you saying that as an individual is not racism. And the reason why they say that is because supposedly there's no power in the minority communities. Yet the Democratic Party has had a long a long track record of power for the last decade or so, and they're endorsing your entire narrative. I could go to Obama and get the same thing I'm getting from you. Mm-hmm. So if you're powerless, then why is Obama on your one of your ideologues, right? Why is Clinton one of your ideologues if you have no power and you have no say? They're just these wonderful people that, somehow weasel their way into power? No. And then Bill Ayers, and then, the ideological forebearers of this Democratic Party. Bill Ayers was, in the weather underground, and he was a terrorist. And he still is a terrorist. I mean, these people are still advocating for terror. They're advocating for terror right now, where they're saying that Trump did not win legitimately or whatever from Electoral College or popular vote or whatever angle they're using. And they're asking for an insurrection. They're asking for some type of thing to be done, some type of, redress, let's say. And the funny thing is, the people they use to propose these ideas, like, for example, CNN had this white guy on, and he was like, Hillary, you got to help us. You won the popular vote. You're a lawyer. Go in there and get him. Come on. The minorities need you. I need you. You've done wonderful work. And it turned out he's a cameraman. He's a CNN cameraman. This is who they're going to interview? I mean, you couldn't possibly make the scenario more Orwellian. And what I would say is that we still have to remember that these people are still human beings. They may be completely brainwashed. They may be, under an incredible spell. They may even have the beginnings of a mental disease, which could become physical at some point. But as human beings and as people who are conscious, awake, and also believers, I think it's kind of an obligation on our part to help these people and help them see all of the stuff that they want to avoid. And sometimes it's got to be tough love. In my community, I'm very aggressive, and I'm very aggressive because everyone is so aggressive in the opposite direction that, as one individual, if I sat there and said these things in a nice way and I can maybe convince them of a couple points, the point would not be hammered home hard enough. Because on the one hand, you have a guy like Trump who's independent and, pushing this whole new radically different Americanism and nationalism, which is at the root of our entire human history. And you have these people who are trying to destroy the planet as globalists, who are not just regular people. They're the sickest people on earth, doing the sickest activities that you could imagine right under your nose, and then flaunting it in a certain way. This whole thing with the Pizzagate, this is not like something that couldn't be hidden if they wanted to, but they wanted to show it to you. They wanted to put it on their Instagram pages, They're not going to put it exactly the way, would be perfect evidence, but they're going to hint at the things that they all know in their little insular circles, like, hey, I know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. Isn't this funny that the Goyim don't know? And meanwhile, they're doing all these things, and it's right under our nose. So all you got to do is help these people cross that chasm, because they're dealing with so much pressure and they don't have the time to research and do all these things. So those who do have the time to research and have learned these things should really take advantage of this opportunity. So in 4 years, let's say after the first, 4 years of Trump's presidency, we can create the coalition that we're going to have is going to be totally different than the coalition they're going to have. They're going to have more brainwashed people who are incapable of dialogue, incapable of argument. 4 years from now, the amount of independent media that's going to be available for consumption is not going to allow your nonsensical liberal paradigms to flourish, because they don't have, you can't defend them with any evidence. You can't defend them with any facts or history or anything. Although you can defend them with is, antagonizing and smearing other people with labels. And that stuff is going out the window. We're all laughing at you at the moment, right? So unless there's some destructive new war where we're not even able to have these discussions within 4 years, if our people do the right job, and I don't mean our people as Republicans, I mean our people as conscious, awake people who know what's happening, we have an opportunity to pull these people back from the ledge and educate them, re-educate them about what's really happening, and do it with, a cheerful, jovial soul, meaning not be antagonistic, because at this point they have already been beaten. You've seen the childish histrionics that they've engaged in, with the screaming and the crying and the, oh my God, what do I tell my kids? What do I tell my kids that a bully is now my president? It's so, the real thing is, what do I tell my kids? This is as a lesson, as one individual with a strong will destroying an entire system, or beating, let's say, an entire system. That's the way you should present it to your children, is this man was hated by everybody, by Facebook, by Google, by Twitter, by Snapchat, by all the billionaires, by all the millionaires, by all the political establishment, by his own party, by the other party. And yet he still emerged victorious because he put in that effort, because he went to so many different cities every day, because he spent his own money and put his money where his mouth was. That's why a success story like this could have even taken place. You don't tell them, oh, look at this bully, I'm gonna destroy all of us. No, that's ridiculous. So all of these things, there's an alternative view. And everything that they present, you can literally, within a martial arts way, use that momentum against them. They call the Republican Party a racist party. Well, show them the history of the Democratic Party. They call Donald Trump a racist and a hateful person. Well, go show him his history, where Jesse Jackson is loudly praising Donald Trump for his efforts, where women are loudly praising Donald Trump's efforts of getting them hired, where minorities have been hired, by Donald Trump, and all of these things. And then, then if they want to persist in their delusion, they're more than welcome, but slowly we'll start pushing back against this. That's my perspective. I think that we have an opportunity. We should look at it as an opportunity to educate our fellow human beings about what's happening.
Yeah, I think it changes a lot of the rules on things, and we can open up different discourse. And if we get rid from that cultural Marxist Frankfurt School mentality, and we can just using simple logical process and having to explain our reasons why we believe something to be true. Just getting back to that. I mean, so much of that would just correct everything. And then if we investigate certain things, what would happen in the United States if Israel doing 9/11 was the mainstream discourse? How would that change the world?
Well, when Obama tries to get $10 billion for them, it's going to be a little more tough, right?
Absolutely. For the past 16 years, the whipping boys in the world and in America have been Muslims.
And then Obama flips the script, and all of a sudden, now he's down for us.
Yeah. And now, all of a sudden, if it becomes Jews did 9/11, now what do? You have 16 years of backed suffering that the Jews have to accomplish now to make up for the Muslims. I mean, it's gonna. I think that would change things more than anything. Yeah. Would be to take go to Israel doing 9/11 as the main story.
And the funny thing is that Israelis are very, just like they do with everything, just like the Jews do with everything, they are blatant about it. Hollywood put out dozens of films that hinted at 9/11 before it happened. After it happened, there was an Israeli couple on the holiday of Purim, which is a sanguinary holiday of the Jews where they celebrate victory over the Goyim. And a lot of wars were started on that. I believe the first Iraq war was started on that. The second Iraq war was started on that. I believe either Libya or Syria in 2011 was started on Purim. During Purim in Israel in 2013, this Israeli couple dresses their children up as the Twin Towers with planes going into them. Now, of course, this is not something you would bring into a court of law, but it is a little creepy. It is a little weird. And I showed it to one of my professor cousins who's a PhD and all this stuff. He could not deal. Screamed loudly. So what? So what? It's not a big deal. They were just celebrating a holiday. It was in poor taste. It didn't mean anything. I'm like, no. You don't get off that easy. Where did they come up with the idea? Why would you even consider, I'm going to dress up my two boys as the Twin Towers with planes coming into them? Then in I think 2014, there was a picture, a drawing, a cartoon done by an Israeli journalist with Netanyahu in a plane going into the towers. And then you're like, Wait, why would they do that? Because they're shoving it in your face to let you know that they did it and there's nothing you can do about it. When they asked him, hey, that's in poor taste, what are the Americans going to think when they see that? Oh, this was an allegory. This was a metaphor for the idea that Netanyahu does not treat the American president with respect. And that Netanyahu is disrespectful to the Americans, and as a result, it's created a fray in the American-Israeli relations. That's the reason why you put Netanyahu in a plane going into the Twin Towers? Okay. So these are ancillary things. These are not things that are primary crux. And if you want to know more about 9/11 in Israel, you can go online, watch Missing Links, 9/11 Missing Links. I wrote about 70% of that, and it, was taken over and pushed into a hardcore anti-Jew kind of direction, and I had kind of left before that happened, but still get a lot of great information. The other thing you can look up is 9/11 Israel's Masterpiece, which essentially is just bringing in, it's an article I wrote many years ago, and it's basically bringing in all the different evidence. And I would say that try to contribute to Christopher Bolin's PayPal if you can, and help him, because a lot of the evidence, the primary evidence about Israel and the Zionist-occupied government in the United States and Israeli Jews and Zionist Jews in America being part of 9/11 was brought by Christopher Bolin. He did a lot of the initial research. He was beaten in front of his children and tased in front of his children, and he's no longer allowed to be in Chicago because there's an open case to get him essentially and throw him in prison for fighting the police, which he did not do. They came and provoked him. So anything else you'd like to add? We're getting into
as far as 9/11, once you get past that, and then you start looking at the JFK assassination, and you look at the USS Liberty, and then you realize that you spend this country spending like $1 trillion every year in defense, and we have at least 150 countries around the world where we have like over 1,000 bases, and the military is supposed to be for defense. Who has ever attacked the United States but Israel?
That's another important question. I've noticed that nobody has ever said that, and not only have attacked the United States, but successfully attacked the United States without retaliation. USS Liberty.
Yeah.
And 9/11.
Yeah. 9/11. I mean, you could say, yeah, JFK assassination, and Jonathan Pollard, I think, is an attack on the United States. But, I mean, ISIS. But, okay, they're all Israel. So there's only one country attacking you. And you're spending trillions of dollars, and you give most of your military aid to this country that is attacking you.
Yeah.
So, one things I always say is I could save like at least $500 billion a year, just instead of giving it to the U.S. military, just give it to Hezbollah and Hamas. Let them do the job.
That's a good idea, right?
Go after the ones that actually attack us.
Or honestly, you could just take away the barriers from Iran and Syria helping Hezbollah. Yeah. I mean, that's essentially the reason why the Palestinian resistance is so strong, which irritates me about the Palestinians in America or the Muslims in America who don't realize that the reason why Palestinian resistance has been successful at repelling the Jews in Israel is because of Iran and Syria and Hezbollah, to create all of these, not only training, but also facilitating weapons transfers and things like that. Otherwise, these people are completely defenseless. But it's these groups, and that's why they want Syria to be destroyed and turn into ethnic enclaves ruled by ISIS.
And that's why George Soros wedges the Palestinians against Assad, and that's why they try to create the sectarian divide, and you create this balkanization and identity politics, and then that takes the Palestinian away from seeing who is actually helping them and who is actually hurting them.
Yeah.
And it's a sick mind that they have been, some you could say is forced, but they need to open up their mind to see the real picture. And like we say, if George Soros touches it, walk away from it.
Right. And that's why Islamophobia being an issue with the new Trump administration, I just totally reject it. Even if, to a degree, certain individuals within the Trump administration, not just the ones he's already selected, but the ones he will select in the future, hold ideas antagonistic to Islam or believe that Islam is a demonic religion or whatever, that's an opportunity for Muslims. If you're a Muslim and you understand what Islam is about, you can take people's antagonism and hatred and animosity and malice towards you and reflect the true teachings of the Prophet. You know, the Prophet himself, peace be upon him, Muhammad, he had his most vehement opponents become his most decisive and devoted followers, because they led with antagonism, and he took their antagonism and led with love and reacted with love. And because of that, those people who were not hardened, their hearts were not fully hardened, they realized that I am being mean to someone who's being overly nice to me. And one example I can close this with is the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, used to walk through the streets in a particular neighborhood, in a particular area, where an older woman used to dump garbage on him every single time he walked past. One day, she did not dump garbage on him. She wasn't there. So he went to her home to inquire about how she was feeling, because she was not there to throw garbage on him. And he wondered, well, there must be something going on today. And when he did that, she broke down in tears, and she realized that this is the reaction of someone who I've been mistreating for such a long period of time. And because I got sick, or I wasn't there to mistreat him once again, he wanted to check up on me. And so for the Muslims in America or any of these Western nations where you see a right-wing outlash, or a backlash, or some type of right-wing nationalism, you should take that and take advantage of that as a Muslim to when they come and attack you, smile in their face, say something nice back to them, and don't encourage that inflammatory kind of reaction. Right now you haven't even been persecuted yet, and you're complaining about things that haven't even happened yet. There's all these fake crimes, fake hate crimes that are happening, where that's what the Jews have done for decades, where they paint swastikas on their synagogues and things like that, on their temples, to make it seem like there's some hatred going on, but there isn't. And we should be very careful before we jump to conclusions, as chapter 49 verse 7 says in the Quran: O ye who believe, if an unrighteous person brings you any news, investigate it fully, lest you harm a people in ignorance and then become repentant of what you've done. And I would say that this applies to so many of our Muslim leftists right now who have taken the mainstream narrative about some type of Islamophobia and all this other stuff and attacks on Muslims, etc., and just ran with it and not realized what's the originating source of this type of information and investigating it fully. So the idea that, whatever may happen with the Trump administration, you should recognize whose side are you really on. As Muslims, we're supposed to be loyal to our country and our government, and he did win despite incredible opposition, despite incredible vote fraud. So we should give him a chance, and also open our eyes up to being aware and alert of what's happening in our country and what's happening on a social level. And look at the encroaching. They're talking about creeping Sharia. Look at the creeping halakha. Look at the way that they've molded our public discourse and prevented dialogue from people. There's no reason an individual like me, an individual like a liberal leftist Muslim, should not be able to communicate and see where we disagree and see why we disagree. But they've created that hard line, no, you're on the side with the enemy, you're not, being brought in. You guys are the same ones decrying President Bush when he said you're either with us or you're with the terrorists. And now you guys are doing the same thing, and you think that it's totally valid, and it's not. So, again, I really appreciate you coming on. We'll have to do it again. Please do subscribe. Please, share the podcast with anyone else that you may think is interested. Send us questions, lawscribemedia@gmail.com. You can ask us any questions that we would try to address in a future podcast. And I just strongly urge everyone to maintain vigilance when it comes to information, when it comes to these divides that people are creating between human beings. These should not exist. You should be able to logically defend your point of view. It should not be so simple to just say supremacy or racism and just get away with that. Defend what you're saying. Investigate fully. Find out if what the mainstream media is presenting to you about Jeff Sessions or whoever else is really true. And hear the other side of the story. Then come to your own conclusions. That's why we are here. We're here, and the Quran tells us, for example, as Muslims, to reflect, to, try to investigate and reflect on whether or not what we believe is true, and, constantly learn. So, that's what we're here to do, and I appreciate, all the insights you brought to the show today, Brent.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts you have before we close?
No, just label does not equal logic. So... You don't dismiss me with your label. It's like you got sexist, you got racist, you got Nazi, you got conspiracy theorist, and now the new one is bully and abuser. Everybody's a bully. Everyone's abuser. If you're aggressive, if you're a critical thinker, we need to toughen up a little bit as a society and use logic.
Yeah.
Logic is a process. Logical is a process. People avoid process. People avoid due process if it has process because they don't like to work.
When you see yourself reacting to anything emotionally, you have to wonder what is the reason why. As a man, especially, you cannot react emotionally. And the reason, if you are reacting emotionally, it might have to do with a little bit of brainwashing, but it also may have to do with the chemicals in the environment where they are trying to stamp out masculinity, because masculinity is eventually going to overturn their entire order, right? Men standing up for their country, men standing up for their families and their wives and their children and the collective and the nation. They do not want that. That's why they need globalism. That's why they need an influx of people who have no heritage, no connection to the heritage of a land, so they can, just exploit the land for its resources and run away and not have any intent to provide their sweat and blood and tears to the development of that nation. So that's what creates division, and that's what prevents a nation from rising as one in opposition.
That's why systematically 5 of NATO's defense ministers are women. It's so easy to manipulate, so right. Easy to in this,
and that's very important as well. Understanding the difference between the masculine and the feminine, and why we are meant to work together, not overlap in our roles. We're not supposed to overlap in our roles. That doesn't mean that a man can't be, affectionate to his son, for example, or something like that. In fact, I was watching a documentary on this yesterday. It's an important point. They say, men obviously have a lot of testosterone, but testosterone might be dangerous to an infant, right? In terms of aggression, like if you lost your mind because the infant is crying. When you pick up a child as a man, there's a hormone called prolactin that instantly increases. It's not something you had to take in, or you adjusted or you lifted weights. Literally, as soon as you pick up a child, your prolactin levels increase and your testosterone levels decrease momentarily. And that's a mechanism that God created to make use of men's natural ability to be empathetic and affectionate, but also to eliminate that aggression in that kind of environment with a child. But at the same time, that testosterone is there to prevent, for example, Hillary and her cronies coming and raping your child. You see? So you have to be able to understand all of these things and why we all exist and what we're here to do collectively. And anyone who believes in God cannot believe that one group of people are forever destined to be, whether they're poor or racist or hateful or anything, because God created all of us, and individuals run the spectrum from all the way to evil and all the way good. So you have to understand these things to have the proper assessment of what's actually taking place, instead of throwing labels and ideologies on people what they don't even have. Dialogue prevents a lot of miscommunication, and I strongly urge those who made it this far into the podcast to continue to lead with dialogue and trying to communicate with the people who bash us and call us names and things like that, by reflecting a better behavior, and thus winning the argument even on that very fundamental level. So thank you again for tuning in. Thank you again, Brent, for being here. We'll catch you guys very soon.